Eleanor Whitmore pressed the unfamiliar ring into her husband's palm, closed his fingers around it, and stepped back. "Go spend Christmas with her," she said. "Go, I am done waiting for a truth you won't give me." She did not scream. She did not beg. She turned and walked up the stairs with her back straight and her heart breaking and her unborn child heavy beneath her ribs. And by the time Nathaniel Carter reached the top step to stop her, she was already gone. If the story moves you, please subscribe. Follow until the very end, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Kentucky, December 1818. The fire in the parlor had burned down to embers by the time Eleanor heard the front door open. She did not move from her chair. She kept her eyes on the ledger spread across her knees, her pen still in her hand, though she had not written a single figure in the better part of an hour. She simply listened to the sound of his boots on the hardwood floor. Slow, deliberate, the walk of a man who was trying to decide what to say before he said it. Nathaniel Carter was always doing that, deciding. She had loved that quality about him once. The way he thought before he spoke, the way he never wasted words. 6 years of marriage had taught her to read the silences between his sentences the way other women read letters. She knew when his quiet meant contentment. She knew when it meant fatigue. She knew when it meant grief. She had not yet learned to read this particular silence, and that frightened her more than she wanted to admit. "Eleanor." His voice came from the doorway. She turned the page of the ledger without looking up. "You're home late," she said. "I kept supper warm until 9. A pause. "I'm sorry, you said that yesterday." Another pause. Longer this time. She finally set the pen down and looked at him. He was still in his riding coat, his dark hair disheveled from the wind, his jaw carrying 2 days of growth she had not yet remarked upon. He looked tired. He looked like a man carrying something he had no place to set down. She had been watching that weight settle on his shoulders for the better part of 3 months. And she had been patient. She had been so extraordinarily patient. "Come sit," she said. "There's still bread and some of the roasted hen." "I'm not hungry, Nathaniel." I said, "I'm not hungry." "Eleanor." He pulled his coat off and hung it on the hook by the door, not looking at her. "Go to bed. You shouldn't be sitting up this late in your condition." She pressed one hand against the curve of her abdomen. 8 months along now, the child restless beneath her palm. "My condition," she repeated slowly, "does not prevent me from sitting in my own parlor." Then, stop treating it like an excuse to end conversations before they begin. He turned. There was something in his eyes she couldn't quite name. Not guilt. Not exactly, but something adjacent to it. Something that flinched. "I'm not trying to end anything," he said. "Then talk to me." She kept her voice level. She had promised herself she would keep her voice level. "Because something has been wrong for months, Nathaniel. I am not imagining it. I am not overwrought or confused or hysterical. And I would appreciate it if you would stop waiting for this child to arrive before you decide I deserve an honest conversation." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he crossed the room and lowered himself into the chair across from her. His elbows on his knees, his head bowed. "Everything is fine," he said. "No," she said quietly. "It isn't." The fire popped and hissed. Outside, the wind moved through the bare tree branches and threw a thin scatter of sleet against the window glass. "You've been leaving before dawn 3 times a week," Eleanor said. "You've been paying expenses you don't enter in the household accounts. There is a name Bennett that appears in the personal ledger you keep in your desk drawer. And when I asked Thomas about it last week, he went pale and changed the subject so fast he nearly knocked over his glass." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "You've been going through my desk." "I manage this household's finances," she said. "I go through everything. That has always been our arrangement. That drawer is private, Nathaniel." She leaned forward as far as her belly allowed. "I am your wife. I am carrying your child. I have stood beside you through 3 bad harvests, a lawsuit over the northern pasture, and your mother's illness. I have never once asked you for something you could not give. I am asking you now to tell me what is happening. Please." He raised his head and looked at her. And she saw it again, that flinch, that almost guilt, and something else beneath it. Something that looked, if she read it correctly, like a man who desperately wanted to speak and had been forbidden to. "I can't," he said. "You can't," she repeated. "Not yet. He pressed his fist against his mouth for a moment. "I need more time, Eleanor, please." She looked at her husband, this man she had chosen. This man she had trusted. This man who had shared her bed and her table and her life for 6 years, and she felt something shift inside her. Not breaking. Not yet, but shifting. Like the first crack in river ice before the spring thaw. "All right," she said. She picked up her pen. She turned back to the ledger. "All right, Nathaniel." She heard him exhale. She did not look up again until she heard his footsteps on the stairs. Thomas Whitmore arrived on Christmas Eve with a bottle of whiskey and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He was Nathaniel's cousin's second cousin, technically, though he had always made a point of saying first cousin in company. The way a man plants a flag on land he doesn't yet own. He had managed the western parcels of the Carter estate for 4 years, and he did it well enough that nobody looked too closely at how he did it. Eleanor had never entirely trusted Thomas Whitmore. She had never said so to Nathaniel because she had no evidence. Only instinct, and a woman in 1818 Kentucky did not bring her husband accusations built on instinct alone. "Ellie," he said, kissing her cheek at the door, his whiskey breath preceding him. "Lord, you look ready to burst. Nathaniel keeping you on your feet?" "I keep myself on my feet." "Thomas," she said pleasantly, "come in out of the cold." He came in. And she watched him look around the entrance hall with those pale eyes of his that always seemed to be counting things. The furniture, the silver candlesticks on the console table, the portrait of Nathaniel's father above the staircase. "Nathaniel in his study," he asked. "He'll be down shortly." "Will you have some cider?" "I'll take the whiskey I brought." He moved toward the parlor like a man who knew the house well, which he did. She supposed. He had spent enough time in it. "I hear you've been unwell." She followed him. "Who told you that?" "Nathaniel mentioned you'd been—" He waved his hand. "Unsettled, with the baby coming and all." She set her jaw very precisely and smiled. Nathaniel was being kind. "I've been perfectly well." Thomas settled himself in the chair by the fire, Nathaniel's chair, and poured a measure of whiskey into a glass he took from his coat pocket. He had not asked her permission. He never did, he said. "Because I imagine it's been hard on you, Nathaniel being gone so much." She said nothing. "I mean no criticism," Thomas continued, swirling his glass. "Lord knows a man has his obligations, his duties. Certain debts, let's say, that have to be paid." He looked up at her. "You're a reasonable woman, Ellie. Always have been." "I admire that about you, Thomas," she said. "Whatever you're trying to say. I'd appreciate it if you said it plainly." Something moved behind his eyes. Calculation. Amusement. A flicker of something nastier that he put away quickly. "I'm just saying," he said, "that a man like Nathaniel, good man, generous man, sometimes carries burdens a wife might not be aware of. And a wise wife knows when to ask questions and when to let a thing lie." "I'll keep that in mind," she said. Nathaniel appeared in the doorway then, and whatever Thomas had been about to say next dissolved into a hearty greeting and a raised glass and the comfortable noise of two men who had known each other since childhood. Eleanor excused herself to check on the kitchen. She stood in the hall for a moment, with her hand on the wall, and breathed. Certain debts that have to be paid. She was tired of not knowing. She was so unbearably tired of not knowing. She found the ring on Christmas morning. Not by searching, not deliberately, at least. She had gone into the library to retrieve a book she had left on the window seat the night before. And it was there, on the small reading table in the corner, sitting inside an open box lined with blue velvet. A woman's ring. A thin gold band set with a small... Simple and lovely and entirely unfamiliar. She picked it up. She turned it over in her fingers. The inscription on the inside of the band was worn but legible. For C, always, your father. She was still holding it when she heard Nathaniel's step in the hall. He appeared in the doorway. He was dressed already, his coat on, looking like a man who intended to go out. On Christmas morning. Oh, he said, that was all. Just that one syllable, soft as a stone dropping into deep water. Eleanor looked at him. She looked at the ring in her hand. She looked at him again. Whose is this? She asked. His face did something complicated. She watched him calculate, watched him reach for some answer that would satisfy without revealing, and she felt the crack in the ice widen. Eleanor, whose ring is this, Nathaniel? It belongs to someone I have a responsibility to. I was having it repaired. The stone was loose. He took a step toward her. It isn't what you're thinking. You don't know what I'm thinking. I know you well enough. He reached for the box. Please, let me explain, just not today. After Christmas. I'll tell you everything, I promise you. But you need more time. She set the ring back in the box. She set the box down on the table. She was surprised by how steady her hands were. You've been needing more time for 3 months, Nathaniel. I know. I know that. And I'm asking you to trust me for a little longer. The woman you've been visiting, she said. The one who lives in the house you've been paying for. The one Thomas calls your obligation, she paused. Is this her ring? Something shifted in Nathaniel's face. Not guilt. Not the guilt of a guilty man. Something more like grief. It's not what you think, he said again. Then tell me what it is. Silence. The same silence. The same wall. The same shut door between them that had been there for 3 months. Eleanor felt something harden in her chest. Not hatred, she could not hate this man. She had tried, these past weeks, to work herself toward something sharp enough to cut through the confusion. And she could not. She loved him. She loved him with the deep, settled, unsentimental love of a woman who has chosen well and knows it. And he was standing here in front of her on Christmas morning with another woman's ring and nothing to say. There is a woman, she said. You have been keeping her. Visiting her. Paying for her home, and you cannot or will not tell me why. Eleanor, say my name like that. Her voice was very quiet. Do not say my name like I'm the one being unreasonable. His jaw worked. You deserve an explanation. I know that. I will give you one. I know what you need. She walked to the door. He stepped aside to let her pass. Go, she said, since you were clearly intending to. Go to her, Nathaniel. Spend Christmas with her, since she apparently has the greater claim on your obligations today. She paused in the doorway without turning around. I will be here when you return. We will speak then. She heard him say her name again. Softly, wretched with it, she walked away. She did not sleep. She sat by the bedroom window with a shawl around her shoulders and watched the snow come down and tried to think clearly. The child moved inside her, slow rolling turns, and she pressed her palm against the movement and breathed. A ring inscribed for C, always, your father. Not a lover's inscription. A father's. She thought about that. She thought about the name Bennett in the private ledger. She thought about the payments monthly, regular, always made in cash, never recorded in the main accounts. She thought about the house Thomas had mentioned, obliquely. The house on the eastern road that the estate owned, but did not use for any purpose she had been told about. She thought about Nathaniel's face when she had asked him about the ring. That grief that was not guilt, that look of a man who has promised to keep a secret and is slowly being destroyed by the keeping of it. She thought about what Thomas had said, certain debts that have to be paid. Thomas had said it with satisfaction. That had been the thing she had not examined closely enough at the time. He had said it with the quiet satisfaction of a man who enjoys knowing something that causes pain to others. What did Thomas know? What did Thomas want her to believe? Eleanor pressed her forehead against the cold window glass and breathed until her thoughts settled. She was a woman who managed accounts. She was a woman who had learned. Because she had to learn. That figures told stories if you knew how to read them. She had kept this household's books for 6 years. She knew how to follow a thread of numbers until it led somewhere. There was a thread here. She could feel it, and she was going to follow it. She was dressed and downstairs before Nathaniel returned. She had eaten breakfast alone, answered the cook's gentle questions with brief pleasantness, and was sitting at the library desk with the household accounts and the ledger book she had quietly retrieved from Nathaniel's study drawer when she heard his horse in the yard. He came inside. He stood in the library doorway. He looked like a man who had spent Christmas morning doing penance. "Eleanor, I have been going through the accounts," she said, without looking up. "Sit down, Nathaniel. I think it's time you helped me understand what I'm looking at." He came into the room. He did not sit. He stood in front of the desk with his hat in his hands, turning it by the brim, and she watched him from under her lashes and waited. "The payments," she said, "to the Bennett property. Monthly, April through December. Consistent amount. You've been making them for 2 years." She looked up. "Who is Clara Bennett?" He closed his eyes. "Nathaniel." She kept her voice perfectly level. "I am not going to shout. I am not going to weep. I am going to sit here until you tell me the truth. Because I cannot help you, and I cannot decide what to do if I don't know what the truth is." He opened his eyes. He sat down. He pressed his hands flat on the desk and looked at them for a moment, those big, calloused, honest hands she had trusted for 6 years, and then he looked at her. "My father," he began. "My father," he said again, and his voice was rougher than usual. There was a woman before my mother, a woman he had known when he was young. She was not from a good family. He couldn't marry her. He didn't. He started again. But there was a child. A daughter. Eleanor was very still. He provided for them. For years. Quietly. He told no one except me, and only because jaw tightened. Because he was dying, and he made me promise. He said, 'Nathaniel, there is a girl, and she has no one, and when I'm gone, she will have nothing.' And he made me swear on his deathbed that I would look after her. That I would make sure she had a home and food and safety. That she would never," his voice caught. He cleared it. "That she would never have cause to think she'd been abandoned twice." Eleanor set down her pen. She looked at her husband, her quiet, careful, well-meaning, impossible husband, and she felt something unlock in her chest. Not relief, not yet, but understanding, the beginning of understanding. "You have a half-sister," she said. "Yes. Her name is Clara Bennett." "Yes. And you have been keeping this secret for 2 years," he said. "Since my father died, I have been providing for her as he asked. I have been stopped. I intended to tell you. I have wanted to tell you every day, but I made a promise. Eleanor, I swore to him, and he pressed his hand over his eyes. I didn't know how. I didn't know how to tell you. There was a part of his life that had been hidden from everyone, including my mother, including me for most of my life. I didn't know how to tell you and not hurt me," she finished. "Yes." She was quiet for a long time. "And the ring?" she asked. "It belonged to her mother, Clara's mother. It was left with my father's things when she died 2 years ago. Clara didn't know it existed. I was having it cleaned to give back to her." He looked up. "That's all, Eleanor. I swear to you. That is all there is." She believed him. She had always been good at knowing when a man was lying. And Nathaniel Carter was not lying. What she had mistaken for guilt was exactly what it looked like up close. Grief, and the particular kind of shame that comes from keeping a secret, not to protect yourself, but to protect the people you love from pain. She believed him, and she did not know whether to put her arms around him or to be furious with him for 3 months of unnecessary suffering. "She knows about me?" Eleanor asked. "Clara? She knows I'm married," he said. She doesn't know the full situation. She only knows that I've been keeping my father's promise. I want to meet her," Eleanor said. He blinked. "What Clara?" She stood one hand at the small of her back. "I want to meet her. Today if she's willing, Eleanor." "You don't have to. I know I don't have to." She met his eyes. I want to. She has been alone through this too, Nathaniel. Depending on the charity of a stranger, even a kind one, is its own kind of loneliness. She paused. And she is not a stranger. She is your father's daughter. Which makes her family. He looked at her for a long time. I don't deserve you, he said quietly. No, she agreed. And the corners of her mouth moved fractionally upward. You don't, but you have me. Now go send a rider to ask if she'll receive us this afternoon. He rose. Slowly, like a man who has put down something heavy. At the door he stopped. Eleanor, he turned. I'm sorry. I am so deeply sorry for every day of these past months. You deserved better than my silence. She looked at him. Yes, she said. I did. We'll speak more about that after we visited Clara. He nodded. He went. She sat back down at the desk and pressed her hand against the child moving inside her and breathed long and slow and steadying and felt, for the first time in months, the quality of the air change in the room. But she had not forgotten Thomas Whitmore. She had not forgotten the satisfaction in his voice when he had said certain debts that have to be paid. She had not forgotten the way he had gone pale when she mentioned the Bennett name. There was still something wrong, something beyond the secret Nathaniel had just told her. She pulled the ledger back toward her. She turned to the entries for the Western parcels. She started to read, and 14 pages in, she found something that made her sit very still in her chair and stare at the figures on the page for a long time before she reached for a fresh sheet of paper and began, with great precision, to write everything down. Whatever Thomas Whitmore was doing, it was not simply gossip. He had been doing it with numbers. With carefully altered numbers. With the kind of small, patient fraud that only a woman who managed accounts for 6 years would know how to find. Eleanor set down her pen. She picked it up again. She looked at the figures once more. Then she began to understand what Thomas had really wanted her to do when he had told her to let certain things lie. He had wanted her to walk away from the books. He had been counting on her heartbreak to make her careless. She pulled the sheet of paper closer. She was not careless. She had never been careless in her life, and Thomas Whitmore had just made the serious mistake of underestimating Eleanor Carter, and she intended to make sure he understood precisely how serious a mistake that was. She found the first discrepancy on page 14, not a large one. Thomas Whitmore was too careful for large ones. It was a matter of $11, a payment recorded twice in the Western parcel accounts. Once under supply costs and once under maintenance. The same date, the same vendor, the same amount. $11. The kind of error a distracted bookkeeper might make. The kind of error that meant nothing on its own. Eleanor wrote it down. She turned the page. She found another one on page 19. Different vendor. Different category. $17 this time. Same pattern, duplicated, disguised, slipped between legitimate entries like a card palmed in a card game. She wrote that one down too. By the time Nathaniel's rider had come and gone with Clara Bennett's answer yes, she would receive them, late afternoon, if they didn't mind the cold ride. Eleanor had filled 3 sheets of paper, and her hands had gone very still and very deliberate, the way they always did when she was angry enough to be dangerous. She heard Nathaniel in the hallway. She did not call out to him. She turned to page 23. She found $42. She set down her pen, pressed her fingertips together, and stared at the ceiling for 10 seconds. Then she picked the pen back up and kept going. The ride to the Bennett property took 40 minutes on roads that were half frozen and gray with old snow. Nathaniel drove them himself, which Eleanor appreciated no driver to overhear. No groom to carry stories back to Thomas or anyone else. She sat beside him on the bench with a wool blanket across her lap and her 3 sheets of paper folded inside her coat pocket. Pressed against her ribs, he had not asked why she was bringing papers. He had learned, over 6 years, that when Eleanor brought papers somewhere, it was because she needed them. "Tell me about her," Eleanor said, after they had been riding a quarter hour in silence. "Clara?" he exhaled. "Careful. She doesn't trust easily, which I suppose makes sense given how she was raised. He paused. She's 20 years old. Her mother raised her alone. Out past the Hendricks mill, told her father was a man who had died before she was born. Which was not untrue by the time she found out any of it. My father died 3 weeks after he told me about her. She never knew him, no. And she knows you only as what? The man who pays the rent, more or less. His jaw tightened. I've visited. I've tried to be, I haven't quite known what to be. I'm not her brother. I didn't grow up with her. I'm a stranger who showed up after her mother died and told her that her father had left instructions to provide for her. He shook his head. She's gracious about it. More gracious than I would be. Eleanor thought about that. A young woman, 20 years old, alone in a rented house, dependent on the goodwill of a half-brother she had never asked for. Knowing herself to be the secret that a powerful family had decided to manage rather than acknowledge. She must be very lonely, Eleanor said. Nathaniel didn't answer. Which meant yes. Eleanor pressed her hand against the folded papers in her pocket and said nothing more until they arrived. Clara Bennett opened her own door. She was smaller than Eleanor had expected, fine-boned, with her dark hair pinned back simply and her dress clean but plain. And eyes that were Eleanor recognized them immediately. With a jolt that went straight to her sternum, Nathaniel's father's eyes. She had seen those eyes in the portrait above the staircase of the Carter house every day for 6 years. Gray, steady watching. Clara looked at Nathaniel first. Then she looked at Eleanor. Then she looked at Eleanor's condition with the brief, controlled expression of someone who has learned not to show surprise. Mrs. Carter, she said, please come in. Her voice was steady. Whatever she felt about this visit, about the wife she had never met suddenly appearing on her doorstep on Christmas afternoon, she kept it entirely behind that steadiness. Eleanor recognized that quality too. She had been doing the same thing for 3 months. Miss Bennett, Eleanor said. Thank you for receiving us. They went inside. Clara had tea ready, which meant she had been expecting them long enough to prepare. Eleanor sat in the offered chair and watched Clara move around the small room with the quiet efficiency of someone who had learned to need very little and manage whatever she had. Nathaniel sat. He looked profoundly uncomfortable. In the way of a man who knows he is overdue for a conversation he doesn't know how to have. I'll speak plainly, Eleanor said, because nobody else was going to. My husband has told me about your father, about the arrangement that was made. I came because I wanted to meet you, and because I thought you deserved to meet me, rather than to continue wondering who I was and whether my knowing about you would change things. Clara's cup stopped halfway to her mouth. She set it down carefully. Change things? No, Eleanor said. It doesn't. Clara looked at her for a long moment. Why not? Because you haven't done anything wrong, Eleanor said. And neither has Nathaniel. The only thing either of you is guilty of is being managed like a problem instead of treated like a person. And I intend to see that corrected. Something shifted in Clara's face. The steadiness cracked, just fractionally, just enough for Eleanor to see what was underneath it. Something very young and very tired and very much in need of someone to say exactly that. I don't want to cause trouble for your family, Clara said. You're not causing it, Eleanor said. Someone else is. Which is part of why I'm here. Nathaniel looked at her sharply. Eleanor Nathaniel. She reached into her coat pocket and withdrew the folded papers. She smoothed them on her knee. I have been doing accounts since we arrived home this morning. I think there is something you both need to know. She laid it out simply. The way she always laid out figures without drama. Without excess, letting the numbers speak, because numbers said things more clearly than accusations. The duplicate entries. The pattern across 18 months. The amounts, individually small, collectively substantial, she had calculated a rough total by the time they left the house, and it sat at just over $900. $900 taken from the Carter estate accounts over a year and a half. in amounts small enough not to draw immediate attention. From a man who managed those accounts and had assumed that the man who owned them was too distracted by a secret and a pregnant wife and the general business of a large estate to look closely. Clara was very still during all of this. Nathaniel's face had gone through 3 distinct shades before settling on a white, controlled fury that Eleanor recognized as far more dangerous than shouting. "He's been stealing from the estate," Nathaniel said. His voice was very flat. "For how long?" "I can trace it back 18 months, with certainty. The pattern suggests it may have started earlier, but I haven't had time to go further back." She paused. "I believe he began when your father died, when you became the sole manager of the accounts, and if you'll forgive me, when you became distracted by the secret your father left you." Nathaniel stood up. He walked to the window. He stood with his back to them, and she could see the tension in his shoulders from across the room. And she waited. "He knew," Nathaniel said quietly. "About Clara," said. "I believe he did. And I believe he used that knowledge deliberately to keep you distracted, to ensure you were managing a secret rather than managing your accounts. He made a point of mentioning certain things to me as well." She kept her voice even. "He suggested last night that a wise wife knows when to let things lie." Nathaniel turned. "He said that to you?" "He was trying to encourage me to stop looking," she said. "He assumed that if I believed you were keeping a woman, I would be too hurt and too proud to examine the books carefully." She met his eyes. "Yes," Nathaniel said. "He did." Clara had been quiet through all of this, her eyes moving between them. Now she spoke. "He came here once," she said. 3 months ago. A man named Whitmore. He said he was your cousin." She looked at Nathaniel. He said that he knew about me, and that if I wanted to remain where I was, I should tell him if you visited, and how often, and whether you ever brought anyone with you." The room went very quiet. "He was asking you to spy on me," Nathaniel said. Clara's chin lifted slightly. "I told him I didn't know what he was talking about, and I asked him to leave." "You didn't tell me," Nathaniel said. "I didn't know if I could trust you," she said simply. "I didn't know anything about you except that you showed up every month with rent money and your father's guilty conscience." She paused. "I'm sorry, I know now I should have said something." "No," Nathaniel said. He crossed the room and sat down across from her, and he looked at her the way Eleanor had never quite seen him look at anyone, with the particular, awkward, effortful sincerity of a man who knows he has failed someone and is trying to figure out how to begin making it right. "You had every reason not to trust me. I showed up and gave you money and called it a promise kept. That was the least I could have done, and I knew it, and I did it anyway, because I was a coward about this. About all of it." Clara looked at him. "You're not a coward," she said. Carefully. "I've been behaving like one," he said. "You deserved better than a secret. You deserved a name." Something in Clara's expression shifted again, that fractional crack. Wider this time. She pressed her lips together and looked at the wall. "I have a name," she said. "Bennett." "You have another one," he said. "If you want it." Eleanor watched them, this man she had married, and this young woman she had not known existed until this morning, and she felt something settle in her chest. Not comfort exactly, not resolution, but the quiet certainty of a woman who has looked at a hard thing clearly and decided what to do about it. She reached across and touched Clara's hand briefly. "We're going to need your account of Thomas's visit," she said. "Every detail you remember. What he said, what he asked for. Whether he mentioned anyone else." She folded her papers. "I believe what I've found in the accounts is enough to bring to a magistrate. But your testimony would make it a great deal clearer what his intentions were." Clara looked at her steadily. "You want to take this to a magistrate. Thomas has systematically stealing from this estate and using knowledge of your existence to protect himself from scrutiny." "Yes," Eleanor said. "I want to take it to a magistrate. They'll want to know about me," Clara said. "Where I came from." "Yes," Eleanor said. "They will." Clara was quiet for a moment. "He counted on that," she said. didn't he? He counted on the fact that exposing him would mean exposing me, and that your family wouldn't want that. He counted on Nathaniel not wanting that, Eleanor said. He did not count on me. Clara looked at her. There was something in it that was almost a question. Why are you doing this? Clara asked. You don't know me. I've been nothing but a problem for your marriage. You haven't been a problem for my marriage, Eleanor said. Silence has been a problem for my marriage. Secrets have been a problem. Thomas Whitmore has been a problem. She met Clara's eyes. You are Nathaniel's family. That makes you mine. And I do not leave family to be used as leverage by a thief. Clara stared at her. Then, with the careful deliberateness of someone who has not permitted themselves to cry in a very long time, she looked at the ceiling and breathed. All right, she said. After a moment, her voice was only slightly unsteady. All right, Mrs. Carter, what do you need to know? They stayed 2 hours. Eleanor filled another sheet of paper with Clara's account of Thomas's visit, his words. His tone, the specific questions he had asked, the way he had looked around the small house with those pale counting eyes. When they finally rose to leave, Clara walked them to the door. And she and Eleanor stood for a moment on the threshold. Will you come back? Clara asked. It came out more direct than she had clearly intended. And a faint color rose in her face. Yes, Eleanor said. We'll come back. She looked past Eleanor at Nathaniel, who was waiting by the carriage. He looks like him, she said quietly. Your father-in-law. I've seen the portrait, the one the Hendricks boy described to me once. She paused. I used to wonder what it would be like to see him. Whether he would have wanted to know me. She stopped, pressed her mouth together. I suppose it doesn't matter now. I think it matters, Eleanor said. And I think he would have. Clara looked at her. Her eyes were very bright. Merry Christmas, Mrs. Carter, she said. Merry Christmas, Miss Bennet, Eleanor said. And then, after a moment, Clara. The door closed. Eleanor turned back to the carriage and Nathaniel took her arm to help her up. And she let him, and neither of them spoke for the first 10 minutes of the ride home. Then Nathaniel said, Thomas is going to fight this, I know, Eleanor said. He'll claim the accounts were errors. He'll say I mismanaged them and he was correcting discrepancies. He has enough standing in the county that people will listen. People will listen to figures, Eleanor said. $900 is not a discrepancy. It's a pattern. And I can prove the pattern. And when he brings up Clara, then we acknowledge Clara, she said. Before he does, we tell the story ourselves on our own terms, rather than letting him tell it as a scandal. She kept her eyes on the road ahead. She is your father's daughter. She has done nothing wrong. Let the county make of that what they will. Nathaniel was quiet. You know what they'll say, he said. Yes, she said. Some of them will say it for a week and then find something else to talk about. And some of them will surprise you. She paused. People in this county have known you for 34 years. Nathaniel, they know what kind of man you are. Give them the chance to prove it. He exhaled. Long and slow. I should have told you, he said. Months ago. I should have told you the night my father made me promise. And I should have trusted you to handle it the way you always handle everything. He looked at her. I am sorry, Eleanor. I am genuinely deeply sorry. Not just for the secret, for what these months must have been like for you. She looked at him. They were very hard, she said honestly. I know. I thought you were keeping a woman, she said. I thought you had stopped trusting me. I thought she stopped. Started again. I thought perhaps I had done something wrong. That there was something I had failed to be. No, he said immediately. Fiercely, no. That was never that now, she said. But I didn't know it then. And I need you to understand what not knowing felt like. He was quiet for a long moment. I understand, he said. Good, she said. Because we are going to have this child in a matter of weeks. And I need to know that we will not do this again. Whatever comes, whatever obligation or secret or impossible promise you tell me. We carry it together or we don't carry it at all. Together, he said. Without hesitation, I swear it. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she turned back to the road. All right, she said. Then let's talk about how we're going to handle Thomas. Thomas Whitmore came to the house 3 days after Christmas, uninvited, in the mid-morning when he apparently expected to find Nathaniel out on the property and Eleanor resting. He found them both in the library. He found Eleanor behind the desk with the account books open in front of her, and Nathaniel standing at the window with his arms crossed, and an expression Thomas had probably not seen on his face since they were boys. Thomas paused in the doorway. His eyes moved from Nathaniel to Eleanor to the open ledgers. Something shifted in his face not quite quickly enough. Nathaniel, he said. I wasn't expecting. I thought I'd look in on some of the supply receipts. Come in. Thomas, Nathaniel said. Close the door. Thomas came in. He closed the door. He stood in the middle of the room with a smile on his face that was working very hard. Eleanor, he said, you look well. Sit down, Thomas, she said. He looked at her. He looked at Nathaniel. He sat. Eleanor turned the first ledger toward him. I'd like to walk you through some of the Western parcel entries, she said. Starting here in April of last year, I have some questions about the supplier invoices. Thomas looked at the page. Something in his shoulders settled, a tiny, controlled settling. The adjustment of a man deciding on a strategy. Those accounts are complex, he said. I'd be happy to explain any entries that seem unclear. There were a lot of repairs on the western fences last spring. And the pricing, page 14, Eleanor said. $11. Henderson Supply, April 4th. She turned the ledger back toward herself. And page 14 again. $11, Henderson Supply. April 4th. Supply costs and maintenance costs. She looked up. Same vendor, same date, same amount. Entered twice in separate categories. Thomas opened his mouth. Page 19, Eleanor continued pleasantly. $17. Calvert Mill. Twice. She turned a page. Page 23, $42. I haven't identified the vendor yet, because the entry is unusually abbreviated. She met his eyes. But I will. Thomas looked at her. The smile was still there. It was thinner now. Bookkeeping errors, he said. Ellie, these rural accounts are managed under difficult conditions. Out in the field, and sometimes entries get in 18 months, she said. I have found $912 in duplicate or irregular entries. All from accounts you manage personally. All in amounts small enough to overlook individually. She folded her hands on top of the ledger. That is not a bookkeeping error, Thomas. That is a system. The smile dropped. Just for a moment. Just long enough for her to see what was underneath it, something cold. Something calculating, and something that had just taken the full measure of how badly it had underestimated her. Then it came back. Harder this time, more deliberate. You've been under a great deal of strain, he said. The pregnancy, and I imagine the strain of recent months, has been Thomas. Nathaniel's voice came from the window. Quiet and flat. I'd think very carefully before finishing that sentence. Thomas looked at him. I am going to present these accounts to Judge Calloway, Eleanor said. Along with a written account of a conversation you had with a Miss Clara Bennett 3 months ago, in which you solicited information about my husband's activities in exchange for, I believe the word you used was, remaining where she was. She watched his face. I would encourage you to secure proper counsel before that meeting. Thomas stood up. He was not smiling anymore. The room was very still. The way it gets still when something that has been pretending to be a gentleman drops the pretense. You have no idea what you're doing, he said. I know exactly what I'm doing, she said. That girl, he started. That young woman, Nathaniel said from the window. And his voice had gone to a place Eleanor had heard only once or twice in 6 years, the place where his patience had ended, where he was done making allowances, is my father's daughter. She is my sister, and she has been living under threat of your interference for 3 months. You will not say another word about her in this room. Thomas looked at him. Something moved across his face, surprise maybe. Recalculation. You're going to acknowledge her, Thomas said slowly. Publicly. Yes, Nathaniel said. The county will manage, Nathaniel said. The same way they managed every other thing that didn't fit neatly into what was expected. People adjust. What they won't adjust to is a man who steals $900 from his own family and calls it management. Thomas looked between them. Eleanor watched him do the arithmetic, watched him calculate angles. Look for exits, assess how much he had lost and how much he might still be able to salvage. You can't prove intent, he said finally. Bookkeeping errors happen. Any competent lawyer will tell you that. A competent lawyer will also look at 18 months of systematic duplication across a single manager's accounts, Eleanor said, and reach a conclusion. As will Judge Calloway, who has known this family for 20 years, and will find it very interesting that these errors all originate in accounts managed exclusively by you. Thomas looked at her for a long time. She did not look away. This isn't finished, he said. No, she agreed, it isn't. But it has begun. He left without another word. The door did not quite slam behind him, but it was close. The room was quiet. Eleanor let out a slow breath and pressed both hands flat on the desk. Nathaniel crossed the room and stood beside her. He didn't touch her. He just stood there, close, solid, steady. He'll go home and destroy whatever else he can find, Nathaniel said. I know. She reached into the desk drawer and removed a second set of papers copies. Made the night before in her careful, precise hand. Every entry transcribed, which is why I already made duplicates of everything I need. She set them on the desk. And sent a third copy to my brother in Lexington. In case Thomas tries to access our mail. Nathaniel stared at her. When did you? Yesterday morning, she said. While you were at the stables. She looked up at him. I told you, Nathaniel, I manage accounts. I know how men like Thomas think. He came here today because he knew something was wrong and he wanted to see how much we had. Now he knows, and now he'll go try to cover his tracks. She began organizing the papers. Let him. He has had 18 months to cover his tracks, and he didn't do it well enough then. He won't do better now that he knows we're looking. Nathaniel sat on the edge of the desk. He looked at her, this woman he had married. This woman he had spent 3 months failing to trust, and Eleanor could see something in his face that was more than gratitude. It was recognition. The particular recognition of a person who has finally, fully seen the person beside them. I don't deserve you, he said again. You've said that, she said. I'll probably keep saying it. I know. She allowed herself a small smile. I'll keep telling you that you're right. He laughed. Quiet and low and genuine, the laugh she had been missing for 3 months, and she felt something in her chest ease open like a window after a long winter. There was still Judge Calloway. There was still Thomas. And what he would do now that he was cornered. There was still Clara, alone in her house outside of town, waiting to see whether the word family would mean what Eleanor had promised it would mean. There was still a child about to come into the world, and a household that needed steadying, and a county that would have opinions about all of it. But Eleanor Carter had started with $11 on page 14. She would finish what she had started. She always did. Thomas Whitmore moved fast, faster than Eleanor had expected, which told her he was more frightened than he had let on in that library. By the time Nathaniel rode out to check the Western parcel records the following morning, 3 of the storage ledgers were gone, not misplaced. Gone, the shelves wiped clean, the lockbox that held the supplier receipts forced open and emptied. The farmhand who managed the supply barn said Mr. Whitmore had come before sunrise with a cart, and 2 men Eleanor didn't recognize, and nobody had thought to stop him because he was Mr. Whitmore, and Mr. Whitmore had always had authority over those accounts. Nathaniel came home with the news, and a jaw set so tight it looked carved. Eleanor listened. She set down her tea. She went to the desk and opened the drawer where she kept her copies. He took the originals, she said. Everyone he could find. Then he doesn't know about the copies. She lifted the stack of papers. Or about my brother? Nathaniel looked at her. Or about your brother, he repeated slowly. I sent Daniel a letter 2 days ago, she said, along with copies of everything. He's a solicitor. He'll know what to do with them. She met Nathaniel's eyes. Thomas moved first, because he thinks he has the advantage. He doesn't. He still has standing in this county, Nathaniel said. He still has friends on the Merchant Council. If he gets to Judge Calloway before we do, then we go to Judge Calloway today, Eleanor said. She was already reaching for her coat. Nathaniel stared at her. You are 8 months pregnant. I am aware, she said. Help me with the buttons. Judge Alton Calloway was a man who had known the Carter family since before Nathaniel was born. He had settled boundary disputes, overseen wills, presided over more county hearings than he could count. And he had a reputation for 2 things, absolute fairness and absolute impatience with people who wasted his time. When Eleanor and Nathaniel arrived at his office, he looked up from his desk with the expression of a man who had already heard something he didn't like. Nathaniel, he said. Mrs. Carter. His eyes dropped briefly to Eleanor's condition and then came back up with the deliberate neutrality of a man who understood that she had come here on purpose. Sit down. They sat. Thomas Whitmore came to see me this morning, Calloway said. Eleanor felt Nathaniel go still beside her. Early, Calloway continued. Before I'd finished my coffee, he brought a rather involved story about accounting errors and a situation involving a young woman and your father's estate. He looked at Nathaniel steadily. He suggested that you had been mismanaging the Western parcel accounts for the better part of 2 years, and that any discrepancies I might hear about were the result of your distraction. The word landed in the room like a stone. Nathaniel said he's lying. I expect he is, Calloway said. He was also sweating, which Thomas Whitmore does not generally do. So, he folded his hands. Tell me your side of it. And, Mrs. Carter, I suspect you're the one with the figures? Eleanor placed the papers on his desk. She walked him through it the same way she had walked through it in the library, without drama, without accusation, letting the numbers carry their own weight. Calloway was quiet the entire time, turning pages, reading entries, making occasional small sounds that told her nothing about what he was thinking. When she finished, he was still for a moment. Then he said, $912. That's what I've confirmed, she said. There may be more in earlier records, but Thomas removed the originals this morning before I could examine them further. Calloway looked up. He removed official estate records. Before sunrise, Nathaniel said. With 2 men I don't recognize. Calloway was quiet again. He drummed his fingers once on the desk. He looked at the window. He looked back at Eleanor. The young woman, he said. Miss Bennet. Thomas mentioned her as well. He framed it as a reason to question your husband's judgment. Mrs. Carter. I imagine he did, Eleanor said. You're aware of her situation. I met her on Christmas Day, Eleanor said. She is Nathaniel's father's daughter. She has been living on the Carter estate's property with Nathaniel's support, as his father requested on his deathbed. She has done nothing wrong, and I intend to make sure the county understands that. Calloway studied her for a moment. Thomas seemed to believe that bringing her into the open would be damaging to your family. Thomas seemed to believe a great many things about how I would react, Eleanor said. He was wrong about most of them. Something moved in Calloway's expression. It might have been respect. It passed quickly, because he was a judge and judges did not editorialize. But Eleanor caught it. I'll need those copies, he said. And I'll need a written account of this morning's removal of the originals. I want names of witnesses, the farmhand, and anyone else who saw Whitmore on the property. He looked at Nathaniel. And I'll want to speak with Miss Bennet directly. She'll cooperate, Eleanor said. I'll speak with her today. Calloway nodded. He gathered the papers carefully. Then he looked at Eleanor over the top of them, with the expression of a man who was about to say something he didn't usually say. Mrs. Carter, he said, I have been a judge in this county for 19 years. I have sat across from a great many people who brought me figures and asked me to make sense of them. He paused. You have done this well. Eleanor inclined her head. Thank you, Judge Calloway. Go home, he said, not unkindly. Both of you. Let me do my part. She did not go home. She went to Clara. Nathaniel tried to argue. She listened to him argue for the duration of the drive back from Calloway's office. And then she told him to take her to the Bennett property, and he did. Because 6 years of marriage had taught him that Eleanor's listening face and Eleanor's changing her mind face were two entirely different things. And he had just seen the first one. Clara opened the door before they knocked. She had been watching from the window. Eleanor could tell from the way she held herself. The slight tightness of someone who has been braced for news. He came here, Clara said, the moment they were inside. Last night. Eleanor stopped. What did he say? Clara's hands were clasped in front of her, tight enough that her knuckles had gone pale. He said the situation had become complicated. He said that if I told anyone about his visit in October, or about anything connected to Mr. Carter, he would make sure the county knew the full story of who I was and where I came from. She stopped. He said a woman in my position couldn't afford enemies. The fury that moved through Eleanor was cold and very focused. She breathed through it. He threatened you, she said. He dressed it up nicer than that, Clara said. But yes, Nathaniel had gone to the window. His back was to them, and his hand was pressed flat against the wall, and he was doing the thing he did when he was too angry to speak, breathing. Slowly keeping himself contained, Eleanor said. Did he say anything else, anything specific about what he intended to do? Clara hesitated. He said the judge was a friend of his. He said that friends take care of each other. Calloway? Nathaniel turned. Thomas said Calloway was a friend of his. That was the word he used. Nathaniel looked at Eleanor. She looked back at him. Calloway showed us nothing this morning that suggested he was Thomas's friend, she said carefully. But we should not assume. We should not assume he isn't, Nathaniel said. They looked at each other. My brother, Eleanor said after a moment. Daniel. He's in Lexington, not in this county. He doesn't owe Thomas Whitmore anything. And he doesn't owe Calloway anything either. You want to bring in a solicitor from outside the county. I want to make sure that whatever happens in that hearing, we have someone standing with us who Thomas cannot touch. She turned back to Clara. Will you testify? Everything Thomas said to you both visits. October and last night. I know it's asking a great deal. Clara looked at her steadily. He threatened me, she said. He came to my house and he threatened me because he thought I had no one and nothing and nowhere to go. She paused. I would like to look him in the face in front of a judge and say exactly what he said to me. Eleanor reached out and pressed Clara's hand once. Firm and brief. Good, she said. Then let's make sure you have the chance. Daniel Whitfield arrived from Lexington 4 days into the new year. On a morning so cold the water in the washing basin had a skim of ice on it. He was Eleanor's younger brother by 3 years, a compact, precise man with their mother's eyes and a legal mind that Eleanor had always trusted more than any other she knew. He came in, kissed his sister's cheek, shook Nathaniel's hand, and sat down at the library table with the copies Eleanor had sent him spread out in front of him. He read for 45 minutes without speaking. Then he looked up and said, "This is not a bookkeeping error." "No," Eleanor said. "It isn't. This is systematic fraud, and whoever did it was careful enough to think they wouldn't be caught, but not careful enough to actually avoid being caught." He tapped the page. "The duplicate entry pattern alone is damning. The amounts correlate too precisely to be coincidental." "Where are the originals?" "Thomas removed them," Nathaniel said. "Before sunrise, December 28th. Daniel looked at him. "He removed official estate records."
Yes, from property you own.
Daniel set down his pen. He looked at the ceiling for a moment in the way of a man adding things up. "Destruction of evidence," he said, following confrontation. "That's not a man who made mistakes. That's a man who knew he was guilty. He gathered the papers. I'll need to speak with your witnesses before the hearing." "The farmhand, Miss Bennett Calloway, has set a date?" 10 days, Nathaniel said. 10 days. He looked at Eleanor. You did well with these figures. Very well, I know, she said. He almost smiled. You always did. Thomas came to the house again on the 6th day. He did not come alone this time. He brought a man named Prescott, who was introduced as his counsel, and who had the smooth, unhurried manner of someone who charged considerable fees and believed that considerable fees purchased a particular kind of invincibility. They arrived at 10 in the morning and asked for Nathaniel. And the housekeeper showed them to the parlor, and Nathaniel went in. And Eleanor stood in the hallway outside the closed door and listened. She was not ashamed of it. Prescott spoke first, in the measured cadences of a man making a formal opening. He spoke about the long professional relationship between Thomas Whitmore and the Carter estate. He spoke about the complexity of rural account management. He spoke about the stress of recent months and the regrettable tendency of concerned family members to misread routine entries. Then he said that his client was prepared to make a private resolution available, should the Carter family wish to avoid the unpleasantness of a public hearing. A sum returned quietly, the records such as remain sealed. The matter concluded without the county knowing anything about accounting disputes, estate management, or any other personal situations that a public proceeding might bring to light. Thomas wanted to buy his way out, and he was offering to do it with money he had already stolen. Eleanor pressed her hand flat against the wall and breathed. Inside, Nathaniel said, "Noble Prescott said something about the wisdom of careful consideration." Nathaniel said, "No. We will see you at the hearing." A pause. Then Thomas's voice, lower, stripped of the professional distance Prescott had provided. "Nathaniel, think about what you're doing. Think about Clara. Think about what this county will say about your father when all of this comes out." "My father kept a promise," Nathaniel said. "He took care of his child. The county can say whatever they like about that. I'll live with it." A pause. "Can you say the same?" Silence. "See yourself out," Nathaniel said. Eleanor stepped back from the door. She walked to the library and sat down and picked up her pen and stared at the blank paper in front of her until her hands stopped shaking. Nathaniel came in 2 minutes later. He looked at her. She looked at him. "Well," she said. "Well," he agreed. He sat. He rubbed his face with both hands. He's scared. He's been scared since Christmas morning. Now he's desperate. She picked up her pen properly. "Desperate men do stupid things. Like removing evidence," Nathaniel said. "Like removing evidence," she agreed. "Which is what we're going to tell Judge Calloway. What Thomas did next was not stupid." Eleanor had to give him that, grudgingly, through clenched teeth, when Daniel brought her the news on the 8th day. Thomas had gone to 3 members of the county merchant councilmen he had done business with. Men who owed him favors, and he had told them a version of events that was technically true, in the way a ping of a field is technically accurate while leaving out the fire consuming it. He told them Nathaniel Carter had been secretly supporting an illegitimate relation for 2 years, hiding the expense in estate accounts, and that his wife overwrought, near her confinement, had misread routine corrections as evidence of wrongdoing. By the time Daniel heard about it, the story had spread through 2 of the county's largest trading families. "He's building a jury of public opinion," Daniel said, his voice flat with professional displeasure, "before the hearing. He wants Calloway to walk into that room already knowing which version the county believes." Eleanor sat with this for a moment. "Can we do the same?" she asked. Daniel looked at her. "What?" "The Merchant Council. Who on it does Nathaniel trust?" Daniel looked at Nathaniel. Nathaniel said, "Harding. James Harding. We've traded for 15 years. He's an honest man. Invite him to dinner," Eleanor said. "Tonight. Show him the figures. Not to influence the hearing, to give one honest man in this county the truth before Thomas's version is the only one available." She looked at Daniel. "Is that inappropriate?" Daniel thought about it. "It's not a legal proceeding," he said carefully. "A man sharing his accounts with a friend and business associate is not improper." He paused. It would not be improper. Then do it, Eleanor said. James Harding came to dinner. He sat at the Carter table, and he ate the meal, and he looked at every page Eleanor set before him with the methodical attention of a man who had managed his own accounts for 30 years. When he was done, he was quiet for a long time. $900, he said. 912, Eleanor said. Harding looked at Nathaniel. I've known Thomas Whitmore since we were boys, he said. I always knew he wanted more than he was given. I never thought he'd take it. He was quiet. I'll be at the hearing. That's all I'm asking, Nathaniel said. No, Harding said. He picked up his glass. You're asking me to tell the truth about what I've seen tonight if anyone asks me. I understand that. He looked at Eleanor. Your wife is a remarkable woman. Nathaniel. I'm aware, Nathaniel said. Eleanor said nothing. She refilled Harding's glass and changed the subject to the spring grain prices. Because she was remarkable, and remarkable women knew when the argument was won and the talking was done. The night before the hearing. Eleanor couldn't sleep. This was not unusual. The child was heavy and restless, and sleep had become a complicated negotiation with her own body. But tonight it wasn't only the physical weight keeping her awake. She lay in the dark and turned the hearing over in her mind the way she turned ledger pages, looking for the entries she had missed, the angles she hadn't examined, the place where Thomas or Prescott would find a crack to push through. Nathaniel was awake beside her. She could tell by his breathing. Stop thinking, he said quietly. I can't. Yes, you can. You're choosing not to. She almost laughed. That's not helpful. What do you need? He asked. Simple and direct, the way he used to ask before the months of silence. The way she had missed. She thought about it honestly. I need to know that whatever happens tomorrow, we don't lose each other over it. That if Calloway sides with Thomas, if the county believes Thomas, if this goes wrong, we don't let it break what we've rebuilt this week. Nathaniel turned toward her. She felt the shift in the mattress, the warmth of him closer. Nothing is going to break what we've rebuilt, he said. You can't promise that. I can promise that I'm not going to let it. He found her hand in the dark. Eleanor, I spent 3 months being a fool because I was afraid of losing you over the truth. I am not going to lose you over Thomas Whitmore. She held his hand. The child moved one slow rolling shift, and she pressed Nathaniel's palm against the movement. And he went very still. Hello, he said softly, to the child. And his voice was so quiet and so full that Eleanor felt something loosen in her chest all at once. She had been holding so much together for so many days. We're going to be all right, he said. Not to the child this time. To her. Yes, she said. We are. The morning of the hearing. Clara arrived at the Carter house before 7. She was dressed carefully. Her hair pinned, her coat brushed clean. She stood in the entrance hall and looked at Eleanor with the steady gray eyes that were so much their father's. And she said, I'm ready. Eleanor looked at her, this young woman who had spent her whole life on the edge of a family that hadn't known how to claim her, who had been threatened and isolated and used as leverage by a man who thought she had no power, and she felt a clarity that was almost fierce. So am I, Eleanor said. Daniel came down the stairs with his case of papers. Nathaniel came in from the yard. The 4 of them stood together in the entrance hall for a moment. Then Nathaniel said, Let's go. They went. The hearing room was already full when they arrived. This county did not miss a proceeding that involved the Carter name, and a whisper of scandal. Half the merchant council was there. 2 of the county's largest landowners, and a row of women in the back whose presence told Eleanor that whatever had said had spread further than James Harding and the council. Thomas was already seated. Prescott was beside him. Papers arranged with professional tidiness. Thomas looked up when they entered. He looked at Nathaniel. He looked at Eleanor. His eyes moved to Clara, who was walking beside Eleanor with her chin level and her hands still. And something moved across his face, surprise, recalculation. And underneath both of those, something that was the beginning of understanding how badly he had misread the situation. Eleanor met his eyes. She did not look away. She took her seat, smoothed her coat across her lap, and placed her hands flat on the table. Judge Calloway entered. The room stood. He sat. The room sat. "This hearing," Calloway said, in his dry, caring voice, "concerns allegations of fraudulent accounting practices in the management of Carter estate accounts." He looked over the room with the expression of a man who knew exactly what everyone present had come to see and intended to disappoint most of them. "We will proceed in order. We will hear figures. We will hear testimony. We will not hear speculation, rumor, or personal commentary on matters not before this bench." He looked at Thomas. He looked at Nathaniel. "Are we understood?" "Yes," Sir Daniel said. Prescott said the same. "Good," Calloway said. "Mr. Whitfield, you may be." Daniel stood. He was methodical. He was thorough. He laid the case out in the clean, specific language of a solicitor who had spent 4 days with Eleanor's figures and knew every one of them by memory. He presented the copies. He named the amounts. He traced the pattern 18 months. Consistent methodology, consistent concealment. He called the farmhand, who confirmed the removal of records before sunrise on the 28th. He called James Harding, who confirmed that he had examined the copies and found the pattern consistent and the amounts irreconcilable with legitimate error. Then he called Clara Bennett. The room shifted. Eleanor felt it, that collective intake of breath, the movement of heads, the sudden heightened attention of 50 people who had come for scandal and were now going to get something different from what they'd expected. Clara walked to the front of the room and stood where Calloway indicated. She did not look at the gallery. She looked at Calloway. She told him about the first visit, October, the knock on her door, Thomas's pale eyes moving around her house the same way they moved around every room, counting, assessing, calculating. She told him what Thomas had asked for. She told him what she had said. She told him about the second visit. December 29th, the night after Thomas had been in the Carter library, the threat dressed in polite language. The warning about a woman in her position, the implication that what little she had could be taken if she talked. Her voice was steady throughout. It did not waver once. When she finished, the room was quiet in a different way than it had been quiet before. Calloway looked at her for a moment. "Miss Bennett," he said, "you understand you are testifying under oath?" "Yes, sir," she said, "and this account is accurate and complete." "Yes, sir," she said. Calloway nodded. "Thank you. You may sit." Clara walked back to her seat beside Eleanor. Her hands were shaking. Eleanor could see it, just barely. The fine tremor she was holding back through sheer will. Eleanor reached over without looking at her and pressed her hand once. And Clara's fingers closed around hers and held on. Prescott's defense was competent. It was not enough. He argued error, argued complexity, argued that a grieving and distracted man could not be held accountable for the mismanagement of his cousin's accounts. He did not have a good answer for why the errors were all duplications rather than subtractions. He did not have a good answer for why they were all in accounts Thomas managed exclusively. He did not have a good answer for the removal of records before sunrise on the 28th. He did not have a good answer for Clara's testimony. Because there was no good answer for it. Thomas had gone to that house and threatened that young woman. And the room knew it, and Thomas knew the room knew it. And by the end of Prescott's argument, Thomas had stopped looking at anyone directly. Calloway recessed for 30 minutes. He came back and spoke for 12. And what he said was measured and specific and built on figures rather than feeling. The way good judgments always were. He found the duplicate entry pattern consistent with fraudulent intent. He found the removal of records consistent with consciousness of guilt. He found Clara's testimony credible and Thomas's explanation for his visits implausible. He ordered the restitution of the full documented amount. He referred the matter of the removed records to the county sheriff. He recommended that Thomas Whitmore's authority over any Carter estate account be revoked immediately and permanently. Thomas sat very still through all of it. When Calloway finished, Thomas stood. He looked at Nathaniel across the room. And for a moment, Eleanor thought he was going to say something, some final attempt, some last argument. But he looked past Nathaniel to Eleanor, and then to Clara, and whatever he saw in their faces stopped whatever he had been about to say. He picked up his hat, he walked out. Prescott gathered his papers and followed. The room began to move around them, voices rising, people turning to each other, with the particular urgent murmur of a community that had just had its assumptions rearranged. Eleanor sat very still and felt the weight of the past 10 days settle and shift inside her like a load finally set down. Clara released her hand. Eleanor hadn't realized she'd been holding it through the whole of the judgment. "It's done?" Her voice was quiet. "The first part," Eleanor said. Clara nodded slowly. Nathaniel appeared beside them. He looked at Eleanor first, checking the way he did now, the way he had started doing again since Christmas morning, the way she had missed so much during those 3 months. She nodded at him. He turned to Clara. "You were remarkable up there," he said. "I was terrified," Clara said. "I know," he said. "You still did it." Clara looked at him for a moment with those steady gray eyes. She said, "Family doesn't leave family to be used as leverage," Clara said. She glanced at Eleanor. I decided to believe her. Nathaniel looked at Eleanor. Eleanor gathered her papers and stood, one hand at the small of her back. And she looked at the two of them, her husband, and this young woman who had spent 20 years on the outside of a family that owed her more than it had given, and she felt something that was not quite triumph and not quite peace, but held the weight of both. "Then let's go home," she said. They rode home from the hearing in silence. All four of them, Nathaniel driving, Daniel beside him on the bench, Eleanor and Clara in the back with a wool blanket across their laps and the cold January air pressing against their faces. The silence was not an uncomfortable one. It was the silence of people who have spent 10 days wound tight as a watch spring and have just finally felt the tension release. Clara was the first to speak. "Will he come back?" she asked, not afraid asking the way a person asks when they want an honest answer rather than a comfortable one. "Thomas," Daniel said from the front, "he'll try something. Men like that don't accept a judgment and go quietly home to think about what they've done. But his options are narrower now." He glanced back. "He's lost the accounts. He'll lose the sheriff's goodwill once the record removal is fully examined. And he's lost the one thing he was counting on most." "What's that?" Clara asked. "The assumption that nobody was watching," Eleanor said. Clara nodded slowly. She looked out at the road ahead and said nothing more. But Eleanor could see her processing it, running through the same calculations Eleanor herself had been making since the moment Calloway delivered his judgment. Thomas was not finished, but he was cornered, and cornered men made mistakes. And Eleanor intended to be watching when he made his. Nathaniel pulled the carriage into the yard and helped Eleanor down first. His hands steady and careful, and she felt the particular gratitude of a woman 8 months along for a man who understood that she was capable of everything and still offered his arm. She took it. She all inside. The housekeeper had kept a fire and a meal warm, and the four of them sat together at the dining table. For the first time, Daniel, who had arrived as a solicitor and stayed as a brother, Clara, who had come as a stranger and stayed as something neither of them had a word for yet but felt, in the easy way of true things, like family, Nathaniel, who ate his meal with the appetite of a man who had not truly eaten in 10 days, and Eleanor, who sat at the head of her table and felt, for the first time since April, that her house was full in the right way. Daniel left for Lexington the next morning. He stood at the door with his coat and his case, and kissed Eleanor's cheek and shook Nathaniel's hand. And then he looked at Clara, who was standing slightly apart in the way she still sometimes stood, close enough to be included, far enough to be ready to step back, and he extended his hand to her too. "Miss Bennet," he said. "It was an honor." Clara shook his hand. "Thank you," she said. For everything. He nodded. He went. Clara watched the road for a moment after his carriage disappeared. Then she turned and looked at Eleanor and said, "I should go home too. I've been away 2 days. You'll come to dinner on Sunday," Eleanor said. It was not a question. Clara looked at her, Clara. Eleanor met her eyes. "You'll come to dinner on Sunday." A pause. Something shifted in Clara's face. That same fractional crack Eleanor had been watching widen for 2 weeks. Slowly, the way ice opens in spring when the water underneath has finally found enough warmth to push through. "Yes, ma'am," Clara said quietly. "Good." Eleanor turned back to the house. "Nathaniel will send the carriage." The county talked. Eleanor had expected it, had prepared herself for it. Had told herself it would last a week, and then something else would happen, and the talking would move on. She had been mostly right about the timeline. She had been somewhat wrong about the texture of it. There were people who said exactly what Thomas had predicted. They would say that William Carter had been a man of poor moral character, that the whole affair reflected badly on the family, that Nathaniel should have managed the situation more discreetly. Meaning, Eleanor understood that he should have managed Clara more invisibly, and Eleanor should have known to stay out of accounts that weren't her business. Those people existed. They made their comments at church and over back fences and in the mercantile. And Eleanor heard about most of them through the housekeeper and the cook, who reported with the particular relish of loyal household staff whose mistress has just won a public fight. But there were also people she hadn't expected. Martha Harding, James Harding's wife. A woman Eleanor had exchanged pleasantries with at church for 6 years without ever managing a real conversation, appeared at the Carter house 4 days after the hearing with a jar of preserved peaches and a look on her face that was somewhere between determination and embarrassment. "I owe you an apology," Martha said, the moment Eleanor opened the door. Eleanor blinked. "Mrs. Harding, Thomas Whitmore told my husband things about your family 3 weeks ago," Martha said. "At the mill. And I believed some of them before I had any right to." She held out the peaches. "James told me what those accounts actually showed. What Thomas actually did." She pressed her mouth together. "I should have known better than to believe a man who was sweating when he talked." Eleanor took the peaches. She stepped aside. "Come in," she said. "I'll make tea." Martha Harding sat in the Carter parlor and drank tea and asked careful, honest questions about Clara, not the salacious kind. Not the judgmental kind, but the kind asked by a woman who is trying to understand a situation she had previously only heard one side of. Eleanor answered them the same way, plainly, without apology and without embellishment. When Martha left, she paused at the door. "She'll need friends," Martha said. The young woman. In this county, being on the outside of things is hard enough without being on the outside alone. She looked at Eleanor. "I'd like to meet her properly, if she's willing." "I'll ask her," Eleanor said. "That's all I'm asking," Martha said. Eleanor stood in the doorway and watched her go, and thought about the way that change moves through a community, not in one great wave, the way it happens in stories, but in small individual moments. One woman asking an honest question. One man telling his wife the truth about what the figures showed. One jar of preserved peaches. It was enough. It was how it always worked, if you waited for it. Thomas's next move came 11 days after the hearing. Eleanor was in the library when Nathaniel came in from the yard with a letter not delivered by a rider, but found tucked under the door of the estate office, which meant someone had come to the property quietly, without announcing themselves, without going through the house. Nathaniel set the letter on the desk in front of her. She looked at it. Plain paper, no seal, her name written on the outside in a hand she didn't recognize. She opened it. The letter was short. 7 lines, it informed her. In the careful language of someone who wanted to be threatening, without being legally accountable for the threat. That certain information had recently come to the attention of a party with an interest in the Carter estate's inheritance structure. That a review of the original deed of transfer, the deed by which the estate had passed from William Carter to his son, might reveal certain irregularities. That a woman in Eleanor's condition might want to consider whether a public dispute was in her family's best interest before the child arrived, and before the irregularities in question became a matter for the county court. Eleanor read it twice. She set it down. She looked at Nathaniel. "He's claiming something is wrong with the deed," she said. "I read it," Nathaniel said. He was standing very still in the way he stood, when he was thinking through something carefully rather than reacting to it. "The deed is not irregular. My father had it drawn by a proper solicitor. I have the original in the strongbox." "He knows that," Eleanor said. "He's not claiming it's actually irregular. He's claiming he has something that makes it look irregular. Something he can bring to court and argue long enough and expensively enough to cause damage even if he ultimately loses." She tapped the letter. "This is not about the deed. This is about the child." Nathaniel looked at her. "He's timing it," she said. "He's waiting until I'm confined, until I'm out of the room, until the one person who has been managing the paperwork and the figures is unavailable. Then he brings his deed challenge, and Nathaniel is managing a newborn and a hearing simultaneously. And Thomas calculates that the distraction will be enough to make a settlement look easier than a fight." The room was very quiet. "He doesn't know you very well," Nathaniel said. "He doesn't know me at all," Eleanor said. She picked up her pen. "Send for Daniel. I want to put together a complete record of the deed and every document related to the estate transfer before I'm confined. If Thomas brings a challenge, I want it answered before it's filed." "Eleanor, I have at most 3 weeks," she said. "Already writing. I intend to use them." Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. He looked at the set of her jaw, and the steadiness of her hands, and the way she was already 3 sentences into a letter before he had finished objecting. "I'll send for Daniel," he said. Daniel arrived in 2 days. He went through the deed and the associated documents with the same thoroughness he had brought to the accounts. And at the end of a long afternoon, he sat back and said, "There's nothing here." "I know," Eleanor said. "The deed is clean. The transfer is documented, witnessed, recorded at the county office. There is no irregularity." He paused, "which means whatever Thomas is claiming to have, it's either fabricated or it's a misrepresentation of a legitimate document." "Can he fabricate something credible enough to bring to court?" Nathaniel asked. Daniel thought about it. He'd need a document, a witness, and a plausible story. The document he could potentially forge. The witness is harder. He looked at Eleanor. He'd need someone with standing to corroborate whatever he claims to have found. "Prescott," Eleanor said. "Prescott is his lawyer," Daniel said. "A lawyer can't be his own client's witness. Not Prescott as a witness," she said. "Prescott is the one who produces the document, files it, frames it, gives it the appearance of legal legitimacy before anyone looks closely." She was quiet for a moment. "How long would it take to expose a forged document?" "Depends on the quality of the forgery," Daniel said. "If it's good, weeks. If it's poor, days. We need to know what he's claiming before he files it," Eleanor said. "We need someone who talks to Thomas, or to Prescott, or to anyone in their circle." "I can ask James Harding," Nathaniel said. "He still has dealings with 2 men on the Merchant Council, who are friendly with Prescott's office." "Do it today," Eleanor said. Nathaniel went. Daniel watched him go and then looked at his sister. "You should rest," he said. "I'll rest when Thomas is finished," she said. "Eleanor, you are 3 weeks from your confinement at most. I'm aware of that. You cannot manage a legal dispute and a newborn simultaneously, which is precisely why I am managing the legal dispute now," she said. With the particular patience of a woman who has had this conversation before and finds it no more useful the second time, so that by the time the baby arrives there is no dispute left to manage. She met his eyes. "Daniel, I know my body, I know my limits. I also know Thomas Whitmore's strategy. And I am not going to sit in a chair and embroider while he builds a case designed specifically to catch us unprepared." She picked up her pen. "Help me or go back to Lexington." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "What do you need?" he said. She handed him a list she had already written. He looked at it, he looked at her. He shook his head once. In the way of a man who has known a woman for 29 years and still occasionally finds her surprising. "I'll start with the county recorder's office," he said. James Harding came through on the fourth day. He came to the house in the late afternoon with the careful expression of a man delivering information he wishes he didn't have. He sat with Nathaniel in the library, and Eleanor sat at the desk and did not pretend she wasn't there, and Harding, to his credit, did not pretend she wasn't either. "Prescott's clerk," Harding said. "Young man, works for a percentage. Thomas has been meeting with him twice a week for the past fortnight." He paused. "The clerk told my foreman's brother, because young men with information always tell someone that they've found a record. Old record from before William Carter's time. A prior deed claim. Land transfer from 1798 that allegedly shows a parcel of the eastern pasture was sold before William Carter owned it, which would make the subsequent transfer to Nathaniel incomplete." The room was very quiet. "The eastern pasture," Nathaniel said. "That parcel has been Carter land since my grandfather." "I know it," Harding said. "And you know it. And anyone who has lived in this county for more than 20 years knows it." He paused. "But a document dated 1798 in the county record files is a document," Eleanor said. "Yes," Harding said. "Did the clerk say where the document came from?" Harding looked at her. "Filed 3 weeks ago. Anonymous submission through the record office. No name on the filing. 3 weeks ago, 2 days after the hearing." Thomas had prepared this before the hearing was finished. He had walked out of Calloway's judgment and gone directly to his contingency. Eleanor pressed her fingertips together. "The county recorder," she said. "Who is it?" "Been recorder for 12 years. Does Thomas know him?" A pause. "They're not close, but they've had dealings. Is Mills honest?" Harding thought about it the way an honest man thinks about the honesty of another man, carefully, and without the comfortable assumption that honesty is simple. "I believe so," he said finally. "He's not a friend of Thomas's. He's a man who does his job." "Then I need to speak with Edgar Mills," Eleanor said. "Before Thomas does." Nathaniel looked at her. "Eleanor, you can't go to the county record office." "Not today," she said. "Tomorrow morning. Early. Before Thomas's clerk gets there with whatever he's planning to file next." She looked at Harding. "Will you come with us?" Harding looked at Nathaniel. Nathaniel said nothing, which was his way of saying yes. 8 o'clock, Harding said. "I'll be here." Edgar Mills was a spare, precise man who ran his record office the way Eleanor ran her accounts, everything in its place. Everything documented, no room for ambiguity or improvisation. He received them with the measured courtesy of a public official who was accustomed to being visited by people with competing interests and had learned to let none of them see his hand until he was ready to show it. Eleanor explained the situation. She placed the Carter deed and its associated documents on Mills's desk. She told him about the anonymous filing 3 weeks prior. She told him, plainly, that she believed the filing was a forgery, intended to manufacture a claim against an estate that was fully and legitimately documented. Mills listened. He asked 3 questions. He examined the Carter deed with the careful attention of a man who had handled enough documents to know the real ones from the constructed ones. And when he was done examining it, he set it aside and pulled a separate folder from his files. He opened it. He placed a single document on the desk between them. Eleanor looked at it. Her eyes moved over the date 1798, over the parties named, over the parcel description, over the signature at the bottom. Witnessed and recorded, exactly as such a document should be. She looked at it for a long time. Then she said, "The ink." Mills looked at her. "The ink on the signature line," she said, "and the ink on the main body of the document. They're different ages." The room went very still. Mills leaned forward. He looked at the document again. The way a man looks at something he has seen before, but is now seeing differently. "The body is old," Eleanor said. The paper is correct for 1,798. But the signature, she pointed, without touching. The signature and the witness marking are newer. The ink hasn't oxidized the same way. Someone found a genuine blank or incomplete document from 1,798 and completed it. She looked up. This is a forgery. But it's been constructed from a real document, which makes it harder to dismiss outright, Harding said. Very quietly, good Lord. Sat back. He looked at Eleanor. He looked at the document. He looked at Eleanor again, with the expression of a man who has just had his professional judgment on a matter redirected by a woman who arrived in his office 20 minutes ago and who is clearly not going to stop until someone does the right thing. I will need to have this examined by a document specialist, he said. Yes, Eleanor agreed, you will. I would recommend someone from outside the county, given the circumstances. I know a man in Louisville, Mills said. Then send for him, she said. And in the meantime, I would ask that the document not be filed formally, not placed into the official record until the examination is complete. Mills looked at her. I cannot simply withhold a filed document on request. Mrs. Carter, I'm not asking you to withhold it. I'm asking you to exercise your professional discretion about the timing of formal recordation of a document whose authenticity is in question. She paused. You have that discretion. Every record office does. It's why the position exists. Mills was quiet for a moment. He looked at the document again. He looked at the Carter deed. He looked at Eleanor, who looked steadily back at him, and Nathaniel, who was standing just behind her left shoulder, and James Harding, who had the expression of a man bearing witness to something he will describe to his wife in detail tonight. I'll send for the specialist, Mills said. This afternoon. Thank you. Mr. Mills, Eleanor said. She stood. She collected the Carter documents. We'll see ourselves out. They were halfway back to the house when Eleanor felt the first pain. Not the vague practice discomfort she had been experiencing for weeks. Something specific and low and unmistakable, and she sat with it for a moment in the carriage seat before she said anything, because she needed to be certain before she said it aloud and changed the nature of the day irrevocably. A second one came before she had finished being certain. Nathaniel. He turned, he looked at her face. He said nothing, but the carriage was already moving faster. It might be early, she said. I'm not going to argue with you about this, he said. She almost laughed. She pressed her hand flat against her abdomen and breathed through the third one and thought, with the calm, clear detachment of a woman who has managed difficult situations her entire life, that the timing was inconvenient but not catastrophic. Thomas's next move was effectively blocked pending the document specialist. The Carter deed was safely in her possession. Daniel knew everything she knew. The case was documented. She had done what she set out to do. The rest, for the next few hours at least, she was going to have to leave to someone else. Send word to Clara, she said. Nathaniel looked at her. Clara? She should know, Eleanor said, and I would like she stopped. Started again. I would like her to be here if she's willing. He looked at her for a moment with something in his face that was too large and too quiet for the carriage. I'll send word, he said. Clara arrived within the hour. She came through the door and went straight to the room where Eleanor had been put to bed. And she stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at Eleanor with those steady gray eyes. I'm here, she said. I know, Eleanor said. Sit down. You're making me tired just standing there. Clara sat. She took Eleanor's hand without being asked. She held it with the calm, capable grip of someone who has learned to be useful in difficult moments because there was no one else to be useful for her. The hours moved the way those hours do, slow and demanding, and entirely focused on the specific, urgent work of bringing a person into the world. Nathaniel was in and out, his face cycling through emotions he was doing a poor job of managing, which Eleanor found privately endearing. Daniel paced the hallway until Clara went out and told him to either come in or go downstairs. And he went downstairs. which was the right choice for everyone. At some point in the late afternoon, between one pain and the next, Eleanor said to Clara, "Are you all right?" Clara looked at her with an expression that said, very clearly, that she was the one who was supposed to be asking that. "I'm fine," Clara said. "You don't have to stay. I know I don't have to." Clara's hand tightened slightly on hers. "I want to." Eleanor looked at her, this young woman who had come into her life 2 weeks ago as a secret and a source of pain and had become, with a speed that would have surprised Eleanor if she'd had time to examine it, something entirely different. "Clara," she said. "Don't talk," Clara said. "Save your strength, Mrs. Carter," she said firmly. Clara stopped. Looked at her. "My name is Eleanor," she said, "not Mrs. Carter." "Nam. Eleanor." She held Clara's eyes. "You are family. Family uses names." Clara's jaw worked. She pressed her lips together. She looked at their joined hands. "Eleanor," she said quietly, like she was trying the weight of it. "Good," Eleanor said. And then the next pain came and she stopped talking for a while. The baby arrived at 6:30 in the evening. A boy, substantial and loud and entirely certain of his importance, which Eleanor felt was a promising quality in a person. Nathaniel was allowed in. He stood at the bedside and looked at the child in Eleanor's arms and then at Eleanor. And his face did the thing it did when he had too much feeling for any of his usual words to carry it. "Well," he said finally. "Well," she said. He sat on the edge of the bed and looked at his son, and she watched him look and felt something that was satisfaction and exhaustion, and love in equal and enormous measure. "We should send word to Daniel," she said. "Daniel already knows." He heard the crying from the first floor. Nathaniel looked up at her. "He's downstairs celebrating with the cook's whiskey." "Lord," Eleanor said. "Clara is with him," Nathaniel said, "making sure he doesn't overdo it." Eleanor looked at the door. "Go get her," she said. "Clara, tell her to come up." She looked down at the baby. She should meet him. Nathaniel looked at her for a moment. Then he stood. Clara came in quietly, standing back until Eleanor gestured her forward. She came to the bedside and looked at the baby with the expression of someone who has not had many occasions to be present for moments like this, and wasn't entirely sure what to do with her face. "What's his name?" she asked. Nathaniel and Eleanor looked at each other. "William," Nathaniel said. Clara went very still. "After your father," she said. "After our father," Nathaniel said quietly. Clara looked at the baby. She looked at Nathaniel. She looked at Eleanor, who was watching her steadily from the pillows. "That's." Clara stopped. Her voice had gone somewhere unreliable. "That's a good name," she said. "We thought so," Eleanor said. Clara looked at the baby for another long moment. Then she reached out, very carefully, and touched the back of his hand with one finger, the lightest possible touch. The touch of someone who is not yet certain they're allowed to. William Carter's fingers closed around hers. Clara made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob and was entirely, humanly real. "Hello," she said softly. "Hello, little one." Eleanor watched and said nothing and thought that this was what Thomas Whitmore had been trying to prevent, not the hearing, not the accounts, not the public acknowledgement of a family secret. This particular moment, this particular room, this child and this young woman, and the small irrevocable fact of a hand held and a name spoken and a family becoming something larger and more honest than it had been before. He had tried to use silence to destroy them. He had not accounted for what happened when the silence finally broke. 3 days later, while Eleanor was still confined to bed, and the house was quieter than it had been in weeks, a rider came from Edgar Mills's office. Nathaniel brought the letter upstairs and read it to her. The document specialist from Louisville had examined the 1,798 filing. His conclusion was unambiguous. The signature and witness marking had been added to a genuine but unsigned historical document using ink of a significantly later date. The filing was a forgery. Mills was referring the matter to Judge Calloway, who was referring it to the county sheriff, who was by the end of that same afternoon at Thomas Whitmore's door with a warrant. Thomas was not home. His housekeeper said he had left 2 days prior with 2 traveling trunks, and no indication of when he intended to return. Nathaniel read the last of it and looked at Eleanor. He ran, he said. He ran, she agreed. He might not come back. He might not. She was quiet for a moment. The sheriff will file for formal charges regardless. His assets in the county are frozen. He cannot access the money he stole without returning to face the court. She paused. He'll come back, eventually. Or he won't, and he'll spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder. Either way, he's finished here. Nathaniel set the letter down. He looked at his wife propped against the pillows. Their 3-day-old son asleep in the cradle beside the bed. Her hair loose and her face tired, and her eyes as clear and steady as they had been on the morning. She had put a stranger's ring into his palm and told him to go. It's over, he said. The worst of it, she agreed. Yes, he sat on the edge of the bed. He took her hand. He held it the way a man holds something he has come very close to losing and has not yet fully recovered the ability to be casual about. I keep thinking, he said, about Christmas morning. About what I almost let happen because I was too proud and too frightened to tell the truth. Don't, she said. Eleanor, don't carry it backwards, she said. We both made choices in those months. You kept a secret. I let it grow into a wall between us without pushing hard enough at it. She paused. We both could have done better. The question is whether we do better from here. He looked at her. We do better from here. Good, she said, then that's settled. He almost smiled. You always do that. Settle things. Like they're entries in a ledger. Item addressed, move on. Items should be addressed and moved on from, she said. Otherwise they compound. Like interest, he said. Like interest, she agreed. He did smile, then full and quiet and real, and she felt it land somewhere in her chest the way the good things always landed. Warm and solid in hers. I love you, he said. I have loved you every day of 6 years. And I intend to love you every day of the next 60. And I need you to know that nothing, not secrets. Not cousins, not fraudulent deeds or missing records or county gossip is going to change that. She looked at him steadily. I know, she said. I've known it all along, even when I was angry. She turned his hand over in hers. That was the hardest part, actually. Being certain of your love and uncertain of your honesty at the same time. I know, he said. I'm sorry. You've said that. I'll keep saying it until it sounds different. It already sounds different, she said quietly. He lifted her hand. He pressed his mouth against her knuckles. And she felt the warmth of it and closed her eyes for a moment, and breathed. In the cradle, William Carter made a small, demanding sound that announced the end of any conversation not centered on his immediate needs. And Eleanor laughed tired and full and genuine, and Nathaniel lifted his son and held him against his chest with the particular new father combination of terror and wonder and absolute. Settled love. He has your mouth, Nathaniel said. He has your lungs, Eleanor said. Lord help us. Lord help this county, she said. He's a Carter. The Sunday dinners began that week. Even with Eleanor confined to bed, Clara came and ate with Nathaniel at the dining table, and then brought Eleanor's plate upstairs. And they sat together in the bedroom, with baby William between them, and talked the way women talk when they have found each other, and are still slightly surprised by it. Easily. About small things and large ones without distinguishing much between them. Clara told Eleanor about her mother quietly, piece by piece. The way you tell stories about people you loved and lost to someone, you think it might actually to hear them. Her mother had been a capable woman who had made the best of a situation she hadn't chosen, who had taught Clara to read and manage her own affairs and never apologize for existing, who had said, near the end, that she hoped Clara would find people who were worthy of her. She would have liked you, Clara said. Eleanor looked at her. How do you know? Because you're not kind in the soft way, Clara said. You're kind in the useful way. She valued that. She paused. She didn't have much patience for people who sympathized without doing anything. Neither do I, Eleanor said. I know, Clara said. That's how I know. They were quiet together for a moment. William slept. The fire settled. I want to talk to you about something, Eleanor said. Clara looked up. The house you're in now, Eleanor said. It was never meant to be a permanent arrangement. Your father wanted you provided for, but provision and permanence are different things. She paused. There is a cottage on the eastern edge of this property. Small but well built, its own kitchen garden, its own well. It's been empty since the old groundskeeper retired 3 years ago. She met Clara's eyes. It's yours if you want it. Not provided. Yours. Signed over properly, documented, recorded at Edgar Mills's office where no one can touch it. Clara stared at her. Eleanor, you testified in a county hearing, Eleanor said. You faced down a man who threatened you. You came to this house when I asked, and you held my hand through the worst of it, and you were the first person to hold my son's hand after mine. She kept her voice steady. That is not the behavior of someone who should be living in a rented house on someone else's charity. That is the behavior of someone who belongs somewhere. She paused. Belong somewhere, Clara, here. Clara was very still for a long time. Outside, the wind moved through the bare trees, and the fire popped, and William made a small sound in his sleep and settled again. I don't know how to. Clara started. You don't have to know how, Eleanor said. You just have to say yes. Clara looked at her, those steady gray eyes. Bright now in a way she was working not to show. Yes, she said. Good, Eleanor said. I'll have Daniel draw the papers when he's next in the county. Clara laughed, surprised out of it. The kind of laugh that comes when a person has been braced for difficulty and gotten something else entirely. It was a good laugh. It was the laugh of someone who was slowly learning that good things were allowed to happen to her. Eleanor thought that was one of the best things she had heard in a very long time. Nathaniel went to the county record office himself the following week to begin the process of transferring the cottage. He took Clara with him, at Eleanor's insistence, because Eleanor felt strongly that Clara should be present for the recording of her own property and should watch her name written into the official record with her own eyes. Edgar Mills received them with professional courtesy. He pulled the relevant land descriptions. He prepared the transfer document. He recorded it in the county ledger in his careful, precise hand, and when he was done he turned the ledger so that Clara could read her name in it. Written in ink that would not fade for 100 years. Clara read it. She looked at Nathaniel. Clara Bennett, she said. It says Clara Bennett. That's your name, Nathaniel said. I know. She looked at the ledger again. I've just never seen it in an official record before. In anything that mattered. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. He looked at the ledger. He looked at his half-sister, this young woman he had failed, and then been given the chance to stop failing, and he said, It matters. That's what the record says. Clara pressed her lips together. She nodded once, sharp and contained. She looked at Mills. Thank you, Mr. Mills, she said. My pleasure, Miss Bennett, Mills said. With the quiet satisfaction of a man who has had a very complicated month and has finally gotten to do something unambiguously right. They rode home in the carriage together. And Nathaniel told Clara about the eastern cottage, the kitchen and the well and the good southern exposure that made it warm, even in winter. And Clara listened and asked questions and looked out the carriage window with the expression of someone who is trying to memorize something before it disappears. It didn't disappear. It was there when they arrived. It was there the following Sunday when Clara came to dinner and Eleanor was finally downstairs again, sitting at the head of her table with William in her arms and the accounts open beside her because a month's worth of entries had piled up and weren't going to address themselves. It was there the Sunday after that and the one after that. And it kept being there in the steady, unspectacular way that real things are there, not glittering, not dramatic, just present and true and built to last. Thomas Whitmore was found in Nashville 6 weeks later. He came back, as Eleanor had predicted, because his money was here, and he could not rebuild elsewhere without it. The sheriff met him at the county line. The charges were formal. The hearing was brief, and the judgment was the kind that does not leave room for contingencies or appeals built on forged documents. Eleanor was not in the room for it. She was at home with William, who had opinions about everything and expressed them at volume. And she heard the news from Nathaniel when he came home. "It's done. Completely," she asked. "Completely," he said. She looked at him. She looked at William, who was regarding his father with the focused, evaluating attention of a person who has not yet decided whether to be impressed. "Good," she said. She turned back to the accounts. Nathaniel stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her, this woman he had married. This woman who had taken a season of secrets and silence and built from it something sturdier than what had been there before. "Don't you want to?" he started. "I know it's done." "Nathaniel," she said without looking up. "I've known it was going to be done since page 14. She turned a page. "Come hold your son. I need both hands." He crossed the room. He took William, who immediately grabbed his collar and held on with the conviction of someone who what belongs to him. Nathaniel sat in the chair beside the desk, their son against his chest, and watched Eleanor work. The fire was warm. The house was quiet in the good way, the way it had been quiet on the best evenings of their marriage, the way it was going to keep being quiet now that the things that had broken the quiet were gone. And in the east cottage, a quarter-mile through the bare winter trees, Clara Bennett was moving her things in, putting her name on a door, learning what it felt like to belong somewhere. Outside, it had started to snow, clean and new, and covering everything that had been difficult in a white that would melt eventually into good spring ground. Eleanor Carter turned the page and kept going. Spring came to Kentucky the way it always did, without asking permission. All at once, turning the brown fields green overnight, and filling the bare trees with something that looked, from the right angle, like hope made visible. William Carter was 3 months old and had already developed a personality that Eleanor described as ambitious, and Nathaniel described as loud, and Clara described as exactly like his mother, which Eleanor chose to take as a compliment. Sunday dinners had become the fixed point around which the week organized itself. Clara came every week without fail, arriving in the carriage Nathaniel sent and leaving in the evening with the unhurried ease of someone who has stopped bracing for the invitation to be rescinded. She and Eleanor had fallen into the habit of sitting together after the meal, while Nathaniel put William down the deck he had claimed as it, with a seriousness that suggested he believed no one else could do it correctly, which Eleanor allowed because it gave her an hour of quiet and because watching him with the baby did something to her chest that she had no adequate word for. In that hour, Eleanor and Clara talked, not about Thomas, who was working out his judgment in a county jail and would not be a free man for the better part of 2 years. Not about the estate accounts, which had been reorganized completely and were now managed jointly by Nathaniel and a new man from Louisville who had been vetted by Daniel within an inch of his professional life. Not about the things that had been hard. They talked about Clara's kitchen garden, which she had planted with the focused intensity of someone who has never before had ground they were certain was their own. They talked about the county lending library, which Clara had discovered in February and was working through with systematic enthusiasm. They talked about William's newest achievements, holding his own head up, recognizing faces, producing sounds that Nathaniel insisted were early attempts at language and Eleanor suspected were simply gas. And they talked sometimes about the future. It was Clara who brought it up first. On an evening in early March, when the windows were open for the first time since autumn and the air coming through carried the smell of turned earth and possibility. "I've been thinking," Clara said. "That tends to lead somewhere," Eleanor said. Clara smiled. She smiled more easily now, with less of the caution she had worn like a coat in those first weeks. "There are children in this county who can't read," she said. "I don't mean children whose families haven't gotten around to it. I mean children whose families genuinely have no means of teaching them. Families out past the Hendricks Mill, past the Bent Road. Where I grew up, she paused. My mother taught me herself. Because there was no school out there. But she was exceptional. Most of the women out there aren't able to do what she did. And the children she stopped. They just stay ignorant. And it isn't their fault. And nobody seems to think it's a problem worth solving. Eleanor had set down her sewing. She was looking at Clara with the focused attention she brought to things that mattered. You want to start a school, she said. Clara met her eyes. I want to start something, she said carefully. I don't know what I'm allowed to want yet. Eleanor looked at her for a long moment. You're allowed to want anything, she said. The question is what you're going to do about it. Clara held her gaze. I thought I'd ask if you had any ideas. Eleanor picked up her sewing again. She was quiet for a moment, turning the thought over the way she turned figures looking at it from all angles. Checking for weaknesses, identifying where the load would bear, and where it would break. The East Cottage has that back room, Eleanor said. The one you've been using for storage. It's large, Clara said carefully. Large enough for 8 children at a time, if the furniture were arranged right. Eleanor set the sewing down again. Which it could be. Clara stared at her. I am not offering to build you a schoolhouse, Eleanor said. Not yet. I'm saying that if you wanted to begin quietly, with a small number of children, establishing whether it works and what it requires, you have a room and a property, and no landlord who can tell you otherwise. Eleanor, Clara said. Her voice had gone somewhere uncertain. I couldn't ask you to. You didn't ask, Eleanor said. I offered. There's a difference. And I'll thank you not to turn down practical solutions on the grounds of feeling like you owe something. You don't owe me anything. You are family, and this is what family does. Clara was quiet. Then, you sound like you've thought about this before tonight. I've been thinking about it since you mentioned the lending library, Eleanor said. I was waiting to see if you'd get there yourself. Clara made the sound that was half law and half something more, a sound Eleanor had come to recognize as Clara's version of being overwhelmed by the fact that things were going well. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth for a moment. 8 children, she said. To start, Eleanor said. To start, Clara repeated, and something in the way she said it, the particular weight she gave those 2 words. The forward-leaning quality of them told Eleanor that Clara Bennett had just drawn herself a future and had every intention of walking into it. The school started in April with 6 children. Clara drove out to the families herself. 3 days before went to the houses past the Hendricks Mill. The ones she knew because she had grown up among them. Knocked on the doors and spoke to the mothers in the plane. Direct way Eleanor had taught her by example. She did not call it a school. She called it a reading group. She said there was no cost and no obligation. And the children could stop coming any time their families needed them for other things. She said she was simply a woman who knew how to read and thought other people ought to as well. 4 mothers said yes immediately. 2 said they'd think on it. By the following week, all 6 children were in the back room of the East Cottage. Sitting on benches Nathaniel had built over a weekend, with the quiet satisfaction of a man who builds things because the building is a form of love. Eleanor came on the 2nd day, not to supervise but to see. She stood in the doorway and watched Clara stand in front of 6 children ranging from 5 to 11 years old. And she watched Clara's face do something Eleanor had not seen it do before: open. Fully and without protection, into something that was entirely and completely certain of itself. Clara knew who she was in that room. Eleanor felt something close sharply in her throat. She stepped back from the doorway without announcing herself and walked home through the spring morning. And when Nathaniel asked why she had come back early, she said, "She's going to be extraordinary," and didn't explain further. And he knew her well enough not to ask. The word spread the way Clara had spread it quietly. Person to person, mother to mother, along the same roads Eleanor's network of preserved peaches and dinner invitations had been traveling all winter. By the end of April there were 9 children. By the end of May, 14. A mother from out past the mill asked if adults could come too. If there was room, if Clara wouldn't mind. Clara said she didn't mind at all. That was the moment Eleanor understood this was not going to stay a back room. She brought it to Nathaniel on a Tuesday morning, which was her preferred time for conversations that required his full attention because it was far enough from the weekend to have his business concerns settled, and far enough from the next weekend not to be distracted by upcoming ones. She sat across from him at the library desk, and she laid out what she had been calculating for 3 weeks, the numbers for a proper building. Small but purpose-built, on the eastern edge of the property, where the road from the mill families ran close. Nathaniel looked at the figures. He was quiet for a moment. "You want to build a schoolhouse," he said. "Clara wants to teach children," Eleanor said. "I want to make sure she has somewhere proper to do it." "There is a difference. You've been calculating the timber costs. For 2 weeks?" "Yes." He looked at her. "When were you going to tell me?" "When I had a complete figure." She pointed to the bottom of the page. "There it is." He looked at the bottom of the page. He looked at Eleanor. He looked at the page again. "That's manageable," he said. "I know it's manageable," she said. "I calculated it. When do you want to start?" "Before the summer rains," she said. "If the foundation goes in next week, we can have walls by July." "I'll speak to the builders tomorrow," he said. She gathered the papers. She stood. She was almost to the door when he said, "Eleanor." She turned. He was looking at her with the expression she had come to think of as the real one, the one underneath the capable landowner, underneath the composed husband, underneath every role he wore in the world. The one that was just Nathaniel, looking at her. "I love you," he said. "I say it too rarely." She looked at him for a moment. "You say it," she said. "You built benches on a weekend for children you've never met, because Clara needed them. You drove to the record office and stood beside her while her name was written into something permanent. You put our son to sleep every night so I can have an hour of quiet." She paused. "You say it constantly, Nathaniel. You just don't always use words." He was quiet. "Use both," she said. "Words and actions, it's not either or." She turned back to the door. "And don't be late for supper. Clara's coming, and she's been practicing a gingerbread recipe for 3 Sundays, and I have no idea if it's edible, but we're all going to eat it and tell her it's wonderful." She heard him laugh as she went down the hall. Low and warm and real, she smiled where he couldn't see her. The gingerbread was, in fact, excellent. Clara had a gift for practical things, for figuring out what something required and then providing it without fuss or drama. The school was the same way. She taught the way Eleanor managed accounts directly, without condescension, starting from where the other person actually was, rather than where she thought they ought to be. She had no patience for children who were treated as incapable. And she had no patience for adults who spoke to children as though their limitations were fixed rather than temporary. Martha Harding noticed. She came to see the school in June, asked carefully if she could observe, sat in the back corner for an hour without saying anything, and then found Clara afterward. "My husband has been on the county education committee for 3 years," Martha said. "They've been trying to get a schoolmaster for the Eastern District for 2 of those years and have not managed it." Clara looked at her steadily. "The Eastern District has a teacher," she said. Martha smiled, which was not what Clara had expected. "Yes," she said. "It does. I'd like to tell my husband about her, if you'll allow it." Clara thought about it. "What would that mean, exactly?" "It would mean the committee recognizes the school formally," Martha said. "A small stipend, not large, but something. Access to the county's educational texts. The ability to petition for a proper building." She paused. "And official standing. Your name on a county record as a teacher of this district." Clara was very still. Her name on a county record again. "Permanent, Mrs. Harding," she said carefully. "Does the committee know who I am?" "My husband told me everything," Martha said. "I told him to put your name forward to the committee." She met Clara's eyes. Who you are is a woman who taught 14 children and 6 adults to read in 3 months on her own initiative and her own time. That is who you are to this committee." Clara looked at her for a long moment. "Tell your husband yes," she said. The committee approved the recognition in July. The same month, the Schoolhouse Foundation went in. The same month, William Carter figured out how to roll over and considered this achievement so significant that he announced it to the household at 3 in the morning, which was also the morning Eleanor discovered she was expecting again. She told Nathaniel at breakfast, in the same matter-of-fact way she told him most things, and watched him set down his coffee cup very carefully and look at her with the expression of a man receiving news his face does not entirely know how to contain. "Again," he said. "Apparently," she said. "How do you feel?" "Tired," she said. "Hungry." "Please," she picked up her toast, also slightly annoyed at the timing. "Because I wanted to see the schoolhouse finished, before I was too large to walk to it comfortably." "You'll see it finished," he said. "I'll carry you if I have to." "You will not carry me anywhere," she said. "I'm perfectly capable of walking." "I know you are," he said. "I'd carry you anyway." She looked at him over the toast. "You're being sentimental. You're having my child," he said. "I'm allowed." She considered this. "Fair enough," she said, and ate her toast. She told Clara the same afternoon. Because Clara was family and family heard things first. Clara received the news with the expression of someone who has been unexpectedly given something they didn't know they were hoping for, a particular quiet delight that she covered almost immediately with practical considerations. "You'll need help," Clara said. "More than you have now." "I'll manage," Eleanor said. "I know you'll manage," Clara said, with a slight dryness that was entirely Eleanor's own inflection reflected back at her. "I'm saying you don't have to do it alone. I'm here." Eleanor looked at her. "You have a school." "I have a school in the mornings," Clara said. "I have afternoons. And I am not going to sit in my cottage and embroider while you need help." She raised her chin slightly. "You told me what family does." "I'm doing it." Eleanor felt something tighten in her chest, in the way it tightened when things were more right than she had the language to describe. "All right," she said. "Then you're here Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, Monday." "Wednesday, Friday," Clara countered. Eleanor blinked. "You can't do all of that and run the school." "Watch me," Clara said. Eleanor laughed. Really laughed, surprised out of it. The way Nathaniel always seemed to surprise laughter out of Clara. It felt like something returned to her, that laughter. Like a piece of herself that had been missing during the hard months and had quietly come back. "Monday, Wednesday, Friday," she agreed. Clara nodded once. "Settled. Done." The schoolhouse was finished in September. 2 weeks before Eleanor's second confinement began in earnest, and just in time for Clara to hold her full day of first school sign proper with a proper and a sign above it that Daniel had painted himself in his careful solicitor's hand during his last visit to the county. Bennett School, Eastern Kentucky District, 1819. Clara stood in front of it for a long time before she went inside. Eleanor stood beside her. "Bennett," Clara said.
"Your name," Eleanor said.
"My name." Clara looked at the sign. She looked at it the way she had looked at the county ledger reading it. Making sure it was real, making sure it was hers. "My mother would have," she stopped. "I know," Eleanor said. They stood together for another moment. Then Clara said, "You should go home." "I'm fine, Eleanor." "You are enormous, and it is September, and you have walked half a mile. I wanted to see the sign." "You've seen the sign." Clara turned her toward the road with a gentle, firm hand. "Go home, I'll come by Thursday," Eleanor went. She walked back along the road with one hand at the small of her back and the September sun warm on her face. And she thought about signs on buildings and names, in ledgers and children, learning to read in a room that had been used for storage. And she thought about a woman who had put a ring in Hassan's hand on Christmas morning and told him to go, not knowing that the going would bring everything back. She thought about page 14, $11, the first thread. She thought about how far you could follow a thread if you were willing to keep pulling. The second baby was a girl. She arrived on an October evening with considerably more efficiency than her brother had managed, as though she had observed the chaos of William's arrival and decided she could do better. Eleanor agreed. They named her Margaret, after Eleanor's mother, and after a conversation that was quiet and careful and meant a great deal to everyone in it, with Bennett as a middle name. Margaret Bennett Carter, written in the family Bible in Nathaniel's hand, and in the county birth record in Edgar Mills's careful ink, where it would not fade for 100 years. Clara was in the room when she arrived. She had been there since the afternoon, the same way she had been there for William, calm and present, and useful in the specific, unfussy way that was entirely her own. When the baby came and was declared well, and Eleanor was declared well, and Nathaniel had stopped doing the thing where he held very still because he was afraid to move, Clara held the baby for a moment, in the way she had held William carefully, as though she was still slightly surprised she was allowed. "Hello, Margaret," she said. "She has your eyes," Nathaniel said. Clara looked up. "What, Gray?" he said. "Like yours." Clara looked down at the baby. She looked back up at Nathaniel. Her face did the thing it always did when something was too large for her composure worked. Briefly, before she got control of it. "Carter Gray," she said carefully. "Carter Gray," Nathaniel agreed. Clara pressed her mouth against the baby's forehead. She breathed in. She breathed out. "She's perfect," she said. "She is," Eleanor said from the pillows. "And she's going to be relentless." "I can already tell." "Good," Clara said. "This family needs more relentless women." Nathaniel made a sound that was caught between a laugh and something more. "Lord help Kentucky," he said. "Kentucky will manage," Eleanor said. "It's had practice." 3 years passed. They passed the way good years do not quickly, because good years are lived in fully, and full living takes time, but without the dragging weight of the bad ones. William learned to walk, and then to run, and then to climb things he wasn't supposed to, and fell off most of them without serious injury, which Eleanor credited to stubbornness, and Nathaniel credited to luck, and Clara credited to the fact that he had apparently inherited his mother's ability to assess a situation and adjust before it went completely wrong. Margaret watched her brother with focused, evaluating eyes and learned, at an early age, to do everything he did but better, and with less noise about it. Clara said she was going to be a judge. Nathaniel said she was going to be a problem. Eleanor said they were describing the same thing. The Bennett School grew. By 1820, it had 31 students and a waiting list, and 2 additional teaching days per week that Clara ran herself, Tuesday and Thursday mornings, with the methodical efficiency of a woman who has discovered her purpose and intends to pursue it without apology. The County Education Committee had stopped calling the stipend small. James Harding had been instrumental in tripling it, quietly, through the budget process, and had told Nathaniel it was the most straightforwardly useful thing the committee had funded in 10 years. Martha Harding had become one of Clara's most reliable advocates in county society, showing up at the right dinners, mentioning the school in the right conversations, deploying her considerable social standing with the tactical precision of a woman who has decided to make herself useful to something worthwhile. She and Clara had developed a friendship that puzzled both of them slightly and worked extremely well, which Eleanor thought was the best kind. Daniel came to the county 3 times a year now, which had started as professional visits and had become, without anyone formally announcing it, family ones. He had a particular soft spot for William that he was bad at hiding, and Margaret had identified this weakness early and exploited it with ruthless charm, which Eleanor found deeply satisfying. Thomas Whitmore served 18 months of his judgment and left the county the day he was released, and nobody missed him. His name came up occasionally in the way the names of difficult things come up briefly, without weight, as a reference point for how bad things had been and how much better they had become. Eleanor's accounts were impeccable. They had always been impeccable, but they were different now, fuller, covering more. Accounting for the school and the cottage and a modest educational trust that Eleanor had established quietly through Daniel, and that would allow 3 students per year from families without means to attend the Bennett School at no cost. She had set it up in William Carter Sr.'s name, because she thought it was the most accurate tribute to a man who had tried, imperfectly and in secret, to do right by a child he owed. Naming the good thing after him was more honest than pretending he hadn't also made a mess of it. Nathaniel had cried when she told him. Not much. He was not a man who cried easily. But she had seen it, in the library, on a Tuesday morning. And she had not said anything about it then or after. Because a woman who loves a man learns which moments to mark and which to simply hold. It was a Sunday in late spring when Clara arrived for dinner, with something in her face that Eleanor recognized immediately. She had seen that expression twice before, once on Christmas Day when she had first told Clara that exposing Thomas meant acknowledging her openly. And once on the morning Clara had asked Edgar Mills if she could read her own name in his ledger. It was the expression of a woman who had something to say that she had been carrying for a while and had finally decided to put down. Eleanor let her eat first. She waited until Nathaniel had taken the children. Margaret, now 2.5, had recently discovered that her father would carry her anywhere if she made the right face. A power she deployed constantly and without mercy, and then she looked at Clara across the cleared table and said, "What is it?" Clara looked at her. She set her hands flat on the table. "There is a man," she said. Eleanor waited. "His name is Robert Aldous," Clara said. "He's been working with the County Road Commission for 2 years. He came to see the school in the fall, wanted to know if we could include a session on basic surveying and land measurement for older students. Something practical that connected to the work available in the county." She paused. "We've been talking. Over the winter. He comes to the school on Friday afternoons to teach the surveying session." She stopped, pressed her hands together. "He's a good man." Eleanor looked at her. "He knows who I am," Clara said. "Everything. He asked me directly. About 2 months ago, because he said he wasn't going to continue spending Friday afternoons with a woman he was beginning to care about while keeping questions in his head he hadn't asked." She paused. "I told him. All of it, the family, the hearing Thomas." "All of it," Eleanor said. Clara looked at her steadily. "He said the only thing that was relevant to him was who I was now. And that who I was now was a woman who ran a school and had more practical intelligence than anyone he'd met in the county, and whose Friday afternoon conversation he looked forward to more than any other part of his week." The room was very quiet. "Clara," Eleanor said. "I know," Clara said. "I know what you're going to say." "I'm going to say you deserve this," Eleanor said. "I'm going to say that you have spent 3 years becoming someone you can be proud of. In a place that is yours, with a name on a building, and students who will remember you their whole lives. And I'm going to say that none of that disappears, because a good man finds you worth his Friday afternoons." She paused. "I'm going to say yes." Clara blinked. "I haven't asked you anything. You were about to ask me if it was all right," Eleanor said. "If it was appropriate. If it would cause problems for the family." She met Clara's eyes. "The answer is yes, it's all right. Yes, it's appropriate. And the only person who would make it a problem is Thomas Whitmore. And Thomas Whitmore is gone." Clara looked at her for a long moment. "I just wanted to tell you," she said. Before I let it become anything. I wanted to tell you first." Eleanor felt the thing in her chest again, the tightening. The fullness of something that has no adequate name, but feels like being exactly where you're supposed to be. "Tell me about him," Eleanor said. "All of it. Start from the beginning." Clara talked for an hour. Eleanor listened, the way she always listened, with her full attention. Without judgment, following the thread of it the way she followed account entries. Looking for the truth underneath the figures. What she heard was a woman who had been afraid of wanting something for so long that the wanting had come upon her quietly. The way spring came, without announcement, and she had looked up one Friday afternoon and realized it was already there. When Clara finally ran out of words, Eleanor said, "Bring him to dinner." Clara, what? "Next Sunday," Eleanor said. "Bring him. Nathaniel can talk to him about the surveying work, and I can decide whether he's worthy of you." "Eleanor." "You can't just, it hasn't been Clara." Eleanor fixed her with the look she used when the subject was closed. "Bring him to dinner." Clara pressed her mouth together. "Yes, ma'am," she said, with the particular obedience of someone who is not obeying at all but choosing to agree because the other person is right. Eleanor said. Clara's mouth curved. "Yes." Eleanor, Robert Aldous came to Sunday dinner. He was a quiet, solid man of 32 with a surveyor's habit of looking at the actual shape of things rather than the expected shape. And he stood in the Carter entrance hall and shook Nathaniel's hand with the straightforward confidence of a man who does not feel the need to perform and does not assume the worst of how he'll be received. He looked at Eleanor and said, "Mrs. Carter, Clara has told me a great deal about you." "I hope some of it was flattering," Eleanor said. "All of it was accurate," he said, which told her he was paying attention and had a sense of humor, both of which were good signs. He talked to Nathaniel about roads and land measurement and the county's infrastructure needs with the genuine interest of a man who cares about his work. He talked to Daniel, who had arranged to be in the county that particular weekend, which Eleanor suspected was not entirely coincidental about legal frameworks for land surveys and property documentation, and held his own without posturing. He let William show him every wooden toy in the house, with the patient attention of a man who either genuinely liked children or was very good at pretending. And Eleanor, who could tell the difference, decided it was genuine. And he looked at Clara the way a man looks at someone he has decided is worth looking at, not with the consuming intensity of novelty, but with the steadier, more dangerous warmth of someone who has already done his looking and made up his mind. Eleanor watched all of this from her end of the table and said very little and made every note she needed. After dinner, when Robert had gone and Clara was helping Eleanor clear the table in the easy, habitual way she helped with everything now, Nathaniel appeared in the doorway and looked at Eleanor. "Well," he said. "He's good," she said. "You're sure?" "I'm always sure," she said. "When I'm sure." She stacked the plates. He looks at her like she's a full sentence, not a footnote. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. "That's a good way to put it. I know." She handed him the stack of plates. "Make yourself useful." He took the plates. He looked at her, this woman, his wife, the person who had handed him a ring on Christmas morning and sent him out into the cold, and had spent that time since building something from the rubble that was sounder and more true than what had been there. "Oh. Do you still check the accounts?" he asked. She looked at him. "Every Tuesday," she said. "And do you?" she said. Her voice was quiet and entirely certain. "I no longer doubt your heart." He looked at her for a long moment. "Good," he said, and his voice was the same quiet. Certain, the voice of a man who has done the work of earning a thing and knows it, and does not take it for granted. Clara appeared from the kitchen with a cloth for the table. She looked between them with the expression of someone who has walked into a private moment and is deciding whether to apologize for it. "Don't," Eleanor told her. "It's your family too." Clara looked at her. She looked at Nathaniel. She looked at the room, this house, this table, this particular and specific and earned version of belonging, and she did the thing she did when something was too full for her composure. She pressed her mouth together. She breathed. "I know," she said. "I'm still getting used to it." "Take your time," Nathaniel said. "We're not going anywhere." On a Tuesday morning in July of 1820, Eleanor Carter sat at the library desk with the household accounts open in front of her and a cup of tea tinkling cold at her elbow, and two children making noise somewhere in the back of the house, and a letter from the County Education Committee, confirming the Bennett School's formal designation as an official district institution with full county funding. She set the letter beside the accounts. She looked at them both. The accounts showed a healthy estate, carefully managed. Nothing out of place, every entry honest and accounted for. The letter showed a school with 37 students and a waiting list, and a teacher whose name was on the building and on the county record and on the minds of a generation of children who were learning that knowledge was not something that belonged only to people who had been born to it. She thought about Christmas morning, a ring on a cold window pane, a man riding away, a woman turning from the glass with her back straight and her heart breaking, and a decision already forming in the part of her that had never quite stopped being a woman who managed accounts and knew how to follow a thread. She thought about page 14, the first discrepancy, the beginning of the unraveling of a lie that had been slowly, quietly destroying the people she loved. She picked up her pen. She wrote the date at the top of the new page. She began. Outside, she heard Clara's voice on the road talking to someone, laughing at something, the easy voice of a woman who is entirely comfortable in the space she occupies. She heard William shout something at Margaret, and Margaret respond with the patient, devastating precision of a 2-year-old who has already learned that volume is less effective than accuracy. She heard Nathaniel answer them both from somewhere near the back of the house, his voice warm and unhurried and present. She heard her family. She set the pen down for a moment. She looked out the window at the July morning, the green fields, and the turning trees, and the road that led to a schoolhouse with a name on it, and a cottage where a woman was becoming herself, and a county that was slowly, imperfectly, in the way communities do, becoming better than it had been. She thought, this is what a life looks like when the truth is finally told. She thought this is what was always possible, underneath the silence. She picked up her pen. She turned the page. She kept going.